We're breaking down every major mystery, buried theory, and impossible contradiction in the history of The Simpsons. Not the surface stuff. Not the stuff you've seen in a 3-minute YouTube clip. The deep stuff. The stuff that changes how you watch the show entirely. Let's get into it. Section 1. The radiation theory Springfield is a contamination zone. Starting with something that should bother you way more than it does. The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989. 36 seasons, over 780 episodes. It is the longest-running American animated series in television history, the longest-running American sitcom in television history, and the longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of the medium. No other show comes close, not Gunsmoke, not Law & Order, not any of them. The Simpsons is in a category entirely by itself. And in all that time, across every single one of those episodes, nobody in Springfield has aged a single day. Bart Simpson is still 10 years old, Lisa is still 8, Maggie is still sucking on that pacifier. Homer still works at the same nuclear power plant for the same ancient billionaire who cannot remember his name. The Flanders kids are still little. Grandpa Abe is still alive, somehow, despite being older than most American institutions. And nobody, not the characters, not the townspeople, not a single soul in Springfield ever stops and says, "Wait a minute, something is deeply wrong here." But we're going to say it. Because once you start pulling at the threads of this show, once you start looking at the exposed wiring underneath 36 years of jokes and callbacks and continuity errors, you don't find lazy writing. You find patterns. You find buried storylines that were introduced and never resolved. You find theories so elaborate and so well supported by canonical evidence that the writers themselves have been forced to respond to them on the record. And you find a version of Springfield that is far stranger, far darker, and far more disturbing than anything the show has ever acknowledged out loud. So we're going deep, all the way down. And what we find at the bottom is going to change the way you watch this show forever. Let's start with the theory that explains everything wrong with Springfield in a single sentence. The Springfield nuclear power plant is mutating the entire town. Not metaphorically, not as a background joke, literally. The plant is poisoning the population, altering their biology, degrading their cognition, and warping the physical reality of the community around it. And the canonical evidence for this theory is so overwhelming that the real mystery isn't whether it's happening. The real mystery is how the show has gotten away with telling you this for 36 consecutive years without anyone taking it seriously. Let's start with what we know for certain. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town, and it is, by any reasonable standard of measurement, one of the most dangerous industrial facilities in the history of fiction. A surprise safety inspection conducted within the show's canonical universe found 342 safety violations. 342. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to regulatory code was $56 million. Burns refused to spend it, not because he couldn't afford it. Burns is a billionaire many times over. He refused because fixing the problems would mean admitting the problems existed. And admitting the problems existed would mean someone might start asking questions about what those problems had already done to the people living downwind. And the violations aren't minor. We're not talking about paperwork errors or missing fire extinguishers. We're talking about radioactive waste being dumped directly into local bodies of water, radioactive waste being dumped onto children's playgrounds, plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk, cracked cooling towers that were patched with a wad of chewing gum not repaired, patched with gum, as if the structural integrity of a nuclear reactor was the kind of problem you could fix with something from the bottom of your pocket. Luminous rats running through the bowels of the facility, rats that glow. Animals inside a working nuclear plant that have absorbed enough radiation to emit visible light, and nobody has treated this as the catastrophic safety failure it obviously is. And here's the one the show drops the most casually and never revisits. Skeletons. Human skeletons. In the basement of a working nuclear power plant, the show shows you the bones and moves on. The safety inspector doesn't investigate. The cameras don't linger. Nobody in Springfield asks a single question about how human remains ended up in the foundation of the facility that provides their electricity. The show just shows you the bones and expects you to accept them as part of the scenery, which, of course, you do, because you've been conditioned to by 36 years of exactly this. Now, the safety inspector responsible for preventing all of this, the man whose literal job description is to ensure that a nuclear reactor doesn't poison an entire town, is Homer Simpson. A man the show's own creator has stated has an IQ of 55. Not low normal, not slightly below average. 55. That falls within the range of what clinical psychology classifies as moderate intellectual disability. A man who, in the episode where Homer discovers that a crayon has been lodged in his brain since childhood, is revealed to have had his cognitive function physically reduced by a foreign object sitting directly against his frontal lobe for his entire adult life. A man who sleeps at his workstation, eats donuts during meltdown warnings, and once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see if it would come out bigger. That is the person standing between Springfield and radioactive catastrophe. And he has been standing there, failing at that job, for over 3 decades. Now here's where the theory gets teeth. The very first visible mutant in Springfield appears in Season 2, Blinky, the three-eyed fish. Blinky is pulled from a river near the power plant and immediately becomes national news within the show's universe. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as evidence that Burns is poisoning the local environment. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television to prove it's harmless. The show plays the moment for comedy. Burns chews. He swallows. He declares it delicious. His aide Smithers looks faintly horrified. The credits roll, and the town watches, and shrugs, and moves on. Nobody conducts a follow-up study. Nobody tests the water. Nobody asks the obvious question. If the fish in the river near the nuclear plant have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people who have been drinking water from that same river for years? What is happening to the children who play near that water? What is happening to the families who live downstream? The show never asks. The characters never ask. The government never asks. The fish has 3 eyes, everyone notes that it has 3 eyes, and then everyone goes home and has dinner and forgets about it by the next morning. The answer to the question nobody asked has been sitting in the show since Season 8. In the episode called The Springfield Files, Homer sees what he believes is an alien in the woods near Springfield. The entire town panics. FBI agents Mulder and Scully are brought in from Washington. The episode builds toward a dramatic reveal, and when the truth finally comes out, the alien isn't an alien at all. It's Mr. Burns. Burns has been undergoing a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so loaded with chemicals and radiation therapy, that it causes his entire body to emit what the show describes as a healthy green glow. The treatments keep him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without them, he dies. The regimen is so extreme that after each session, Burns wanders out of the medical facility in a dazed, euphoric state, stumbling through the woods behind Springfield like something that doesn't belong in this world. He literally glows in the dark. That's not a metaphor. Burns is so saturated with radiation that his body emits visible light. And the people of Springfield see this glowing, shuffling figure in the forest, and their first instinct is alien, not radiation. Not the nuclear plant that has dominated their skyline their entire lives. An alien from outer space. That's how completely they've been conditioned not to connect the dots. The plant is right there. The glow is right there. The fish with 3 eyes is right there. And the townspeople look at a glowing man wandering out of the woods and conclude that the most plausible explanation is extraterrestrial life. That is the depth of the denial. That is how thoroughly the contamination has degraded their capacity for basic cause and effect reasoning. And then the Simpsons movie. The episode-level evidence becomes impossible to ignore when you scale it up to the film. Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so catastrophic that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency operating within the show's own universe, determines that the town must be sealed under a massive glass dome to prevent its pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. Think about that. The United States government looked at Springfield and concluded that the only viable solution was physical containment. Not cleanup. Not remediation. Not fines or shutdowns or criminal charges. A dome. An actual physical dome, sealed over an inhabited town, trapping everyone inside with the contamination. Springfield isn't just polluted. Springfield has been classified as an environmental hazard by the federal government of the United States of America. The town is a containment zone, and the people inside it, every single resident who has been drinking that water, breathing that air, living downwind of those cracked cooling towers, they're still inside when the dome goes up. The government didn't evacuate them first. The government sealed them in. Now look at the residents themselves. Look at them closely. Homer Simpson. Massive overbite, bulging eyes, 4 fingers on each hand. A skull shape that defies human biology in at least 3 dimensions. An IQ so low it qualifies as a clinical disability by any recognized medical standard. A body that can absorb punishment that would kill a normal human being 10 times over. He has been shot. He has been electrocuted. He has fallen off cliffs. He has been hit by cars traveling at speed. He has survived explosions. He has walked away from every single one of them without permanent injury. His healing rate is absurd. His pain tolerance is inhuman. And he has worked inside a nuclear facility in direct proximity to an active reactor core for the entirety of his adult life. Marge Simpson. Same bulging eyes. Same 4 fingers. Hair that defies the laws of physics and gravity in a way that should have attracted scientific study decades ago. Growing straight up from her head in a tower, she has maintained in exactly the same shape for 36 years without apparent effort. Marge was briefly employed at the Springfield nuclear power plant herself. She was exposed to the same facility, the same violations, the same leaking radiation. And her children, all 3 of them, were born after both parents had already been soaking in Springfield's contaminated environment for years. Bart, Lisa, Maggie, all born in Springfield, all raised in Springfield, all drinking the same water and breathing the same air and living under the shadow of those cracked cooling towers every single day of their lives. And every single one of them displays physical characteristics that do not occur in normal human populations. The spiky hair that maintains its shape without product, the overbites, the bulging eyes, the yellow skin that covers every resident of this town and nobody else. Because here's the detail that makes this theory snap into place. When celebrities visit Springfield, when guest characters arrive from outside the town, they look different. Not slightly different, fundamentally different. Their proportions are more natural. Their eyes are more normally shaped. Their features more closely resemble actual human anatomy. The show draws outsiders with more realistic proportions than it draws Springfield residents. And the explanation that everyone accepts is, that's just the art style. That's just how The Simpsons looks. The insiders are yellow and 4-fingered because that's what cartoon characters look like. Except within the logic of the show's own universe, there is a visible, observable, consistent difference between people who live in Springfield and people who don't. The people inside the contamination zone look mutated. The people outside it look normal. The show has been drawing this distinction for 36 years and presenting it as aesthetic convention rather than what it actually is, evidence. Even the animals are affected. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, has the same bulging eyes as his owners. The same proportions that deviate from real canine anatomy in the same direction and to the same degree as the humans around him. Blinky the fish has 3 eyes. Springfield's wildlife is demonstrably mutated by the power plant's runoff. The show tells you this directly. It shows you a 3-eyed fish and labels it as the product of radiation contamination. And then it expects you to believe that the exact same radiation in the exact same water supply has had 0 observable effect on the humans drinking it. Burns knows. He has always known. The show makes this explicit across multiple episodes. Burns funds private medical research that he keeps entirely to himself. He has personal physicians who don't serve the general Springfield population. He undergoes the weekly treatments that keep him alive by managing what amounts to chronic radiation poisoning in his own body. Burns understands radiation biology better than anyone in Springfield because he is personally dependent on managing its effects in his own tissues. He has the resources, the infrastructure, the pharmaceutical division, the experimental treatment protocols, and the motivation to understand exactly what radiation does to biological systems. He knows what his plant is doing to Springfield because he is living proof of what radiation does to a human body when it accumulates without management. And he knows that Springfield doesn't have management. Springfield has Homer. Homer's continued employment isn't a mistake. It isn't Burns being forgetful or negligent. It's strategy. When German investors briefly purchased the plant, the very first thing they did was fire Homer. The second thing they did was assess the cost of bringing the facility up to code. The estimate nearly bankrupted them. Burns bought the plant back and immediately rehired Homer. A competent safety inspector would shut that plant down within a week. A competent safety inspector would file the reports, trigger the inspections, document the violations, and bring the regulatory weight of the federal government down on Burns's empire with enough force to end it permanently. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking. The water stays poisoned. And Burns maintains his monopoly over Springfield's power supply, its economy, and by extension its entire population, a population that is too cognitively impaired by decades of radiation exposure to understand what is happening to them. The crayon in Homer's brain isn't the full story. Season 12 reveals that Homer once had the crayon removed. A doctor extracted it, and Homer's IQ skyrocketed to genius level. He became intelligent, articulate, capable of understanding the world around him with clarity for what was apparently the first time in his life. He wrote a scientific paper that was published in a peer-reviewed journal. He had genuine, sustained, complex conversations. He saw Springfield for what it really was. He saw his job for what it really was. He saw his life clearly, and it made him miserable, so he had the crayon put back in. He chose stupidity. He chose the fog. He chose the comfortable blindness of not being able to see what was being done to him and the people around him, because seeing it was worse than not seeing it. But here is the question the show never asks, and it's the most important question in the entire series. How did a crayon get lodged in a child's brain in the first place without anyone noticing? Homer went through his entire childhood, his entire adolescence, his entire adult life, visiting doctors in Springfield, getting medical checkups from Springfield medical professionals, and not a single one of them found a foreign object in his skull. Not one. Either every doctor in Springfield is incompetent beyond any possible explanation, or someone knew the crayon was there and chose not to remove it. And if the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised, if the doctors are looking the other way while radiation eats through their patients' neurons, if Burns's influence extends into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he essentially owns, then Homer's crayon isn't just an accident. It's a symbol the show is using to tell you something it can never say directly. The people of Springfield have something wrong with their brains. Something that keeps them dumb and compliant and incapable of looking up at those cracked cooling towers and asking the most basic question a human being can ask: why are we all like this? The radiation theory doesn't explain one mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them. The characters don't age because their mutated biology has been fundamentally altered at the cellular level. The town resets after catastrophic events because the population's memory function is compromised by chronic neurological damage. Homer survives injuries that should kill him because his body has adapted to radiation exposure in ways that make him nearly indestructible but cognitively devastated. Burns stays alive through treatments that would kill a normal human because he has been managing his own radiation exposure for over a century with resources nobody else in town has access to. And nobody in Springfield questions any of this because the same poison that mutated their bodies also damaged the part of their brains responsible for critical thinking. Springfield isn't a quirky cartoon town. It's a contamination zone. The residents aren't eccentric, they're symptomatic. And the nuclear power plant that dominates their skyline, that provides their electricity, that employs their neighbors and poisons their water and irradiates their children, it isn't a background gag. It's the cause. It has always been the cause. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery from a fatal injury, every forgotten catastrophe, every reset, every unexplained mystery. It all traces back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible poison into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged brains that can't figure out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers. The Springfield nuclear power plant isn't just part of the show. It is the show. And nobody in Springfield will ever figure that out, because the plant already made sure they can't. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment with your time and your location. I want to see where in the world people are losing sleep over Simpsons theories. And if you're enjoying this breakdown, subscribe because we're just getting started, and what comes next is going to get considerably stranger. Section 2. The Homer Coma Theory. Everything since 1993 is a dream. Now we're going to reframe everything you just heard about Springfield. Because what if the radiation theory is correct but only inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since 1993? On the 1st of April 1993, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired. It was called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple. Bart plays a series of increasingly elaborate April Fool's pranks on Homer, escalating each time until the final one. He takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and puts it inside an industrial paint shaker. He shakes it until the can is under enough internal pressure to be functionally explosive. Then he puts it back. When Homer opens the can, the explosion is so violent that it sends him to the hospital. While Homer is lying in his hospital bed recovering, he spots a vending machine across the room. He tries to reach it to get a candy bar. The vending machine tips over, it falls, it crushes him completely. And Homer Simpson flatlines. Not in a dream sequence. Not in a treehouse of horror. In a canonical episode of The Simpsons, Homer Simpson flatlines and enters a clinically unconscious state, a coma that lasts for 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer seemingly waking up. Bart tearfully confesses at his bedside that the whole thing was his fault. Homer springs awake, immediately starts strangling his son. The family laughs, Homer laughs. Everything goes back to normal. The show tells you he woke up, credits roll. But here's what the show also tells you. In the final moments of that same episode, Homer lost 5% of his brain function during the coma. 5%. Gone. Destroyed permanently. Never coming back. And Homer's response to learning that he is permanently brain damaged is to laugh, even though, he says himself, he doesn't understand why he's laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The episode ends. The Simpsons continues for 32 more years as if nothing happened. Unless nothing did happen. Unless Homer never woke up at all. This is the Homer coma theory. And it is the single most popular, most debated, and most internally consistent fan theory in the entire history of The Simpsons. The basic premise originally proposed on Reddit by a user called Hard to Pick A. Name is this. Homer did not wake up from his coma in April 1993. Every single episode that has aired since that date, every storyline, every character development, every guest appearance, every impossible event, is a dream being generated by the comatose mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing brain function, while his family sits beside him and waits for him to open his eyes. The evidence is genuinely unsettling. Let's walk through it. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic exactly, it was always a cartoon, but the storylines dealt with recognizable human problems. Homer tries to quit drinking. Marge considers marital infidelity. Lisa develops a crush on a substitute teacher. Bart struggles with his grades and faces the possibility of being held back a year. These are everyday family problems told through the lens of satire, but they are rooted in situations that real families actually experience. Financial stress, marital tension, academic failure. The show's emotional core was built on relatable domestic struggles, and the comedy came from the recognizability of the situations. After the coma, everything changes. And the shift is not subtle, it is seismic. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer becomes the leader of a vigilante group. Homer joins a secret society with genuine political power. Homer discovers that his mother has been a fugitive radical this whole time. Homer meets God. Not once, twice. The show goes from a family sitcom grounded in economic anxiety to a show where the main character has met multiple sitting presidents, traveled to dozens of countries, held hundreds of different jobs, befriended celebrities from every field, and survived physical trauma that would kill a trained Marine. The escalation is so dramatic that even casual fans have noticed it. The internet has been arguing about when The Simpsons went bad for the better part of 20 years. Fans point to different moments: Season 9, Season 10, the episode with Principal Skinner's real identity as the moment the show lost its way. But none of those debates ever converge on a single answer because nobody is looking at the right episode. The coma theory argues that the answer is precise. The Simpsons didn't get bad. Homer's brain got worse. And the increasingly surreal, increasingly implausible, increasingly disconnected from reality nature of the later seasons isn't a failure of the writing staff. It's a symptom of a deteriorating mind trying to sustain a dream that's slowly losing coherence. Now here's the detail that makes the theory genuinely haunt you. 6 months before the coma episode in the season 4 premiere, Homer, the heretic Homer, has a conversation with God. An actual face-to-face conversation, played straight within the episode's logic. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something specific. He tells Homer that he will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. God says Homer's time is coming. Not in a vague, metaphorical sense. Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The timeline matches. God told Homer that his conscious life was nearly at its end. 6 months later, a vending machine fell on him, and Homer's waking life ended. What the show presents as a quirky theological gag reads, under the coma theory, as something much more uncomfortable. God was telling Homer that his time on the surface was almost up. And everything that followed every episode since the 1st of April 1993 is the dream of a dying man who is desperately trying to hold on to the people he loves. Let's talk about the aging problem, because this is where the coma theory is most powerful. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge haven't gained a wrinkle between them. The show uses what the industry calls a floating timeline, where the character's present is always the audience's present, the technology updates, the cultural references update, the year updates, but the characters remain frozen at the exact same ages forever. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their biology has been mutated. The cartoon logic explanation says it's just how animated shows work. But the coma theory has the simplest answer, the most emotionally devastating answer. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went to sleep in April 1993 and never woke up. Of course, his children don't age. His unconscious brain cannot imagine them growing up because he was never there to see it happen. His wife doesn't age because the last time he saw her, she looked exactly like that. His friends don't change because his memory of them is frozen at the moment the vending machine fell. Homer's coma dream preserves his world exactly as it was on the day he lost it, because that is what comas do to the mind. They lock you in place. They freeze the world at the last moment you experienced it and hold it there, unchanging, while time moves on without you. And every episode since April 1993 is Homer's brain running simulations of a life he is no longer living, using the only reference material it has, the world as it existed on the day he went under. The celebrity appearances make sense under this theory too, and in a way that the official explanation Springfield just became famous never does. Homer's comatose brain, lying in a hospital room, is receiving ambient stimuli from the environment around it. Television playing in the background, conversations happening at his bedside, radio, visitors. His brain hears names, voices, cultural references, fragments of news and entertainment, and it incorporates all of it into the dream. That's why later seasons are flooded with celebrity guest appearances. It's not that Springfield became a magnet for famous people. It's that Homer's brain is absorbing fragments of external media through the fog of unconsciousness and weaving them into the dream world as characters. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield is a voice Homer heard through the hospital room ceiling, translated into a dream character by a brain that is trying, desperately, to keep the simulation running. The show itself has acknowledged this theory, and the way it did so is one of the strangest moments in the entire history of the series. In season 34, an episode called Lisa the Boy Scout included what was presented to the public as a deliberately leaked fake deleted scene. In this scene, Homer wakes up from a long coma. He is clearly in a hospital. He looks around. He is confused. And the scene makes clear in no uncertain terms that every outlandish episode since the early 90s was just a dream, exactly as the theory proposes. The scene was animated, voiced, produced to a finished standard. And then the show's producers claimed it had been planted by hackers as a hoax. Think about what it means that they made it at all. The writers know about the coma theory. They have engaged with it. They thought about it seriously enough to animate a version of it and present it to the audience. And their denial, their insistence that Homer is not in a coma, that the theory is not true, came wrapped inside an episode that literally depicted Homer waking up from a coma. They showed you the truth and told you it was a joke. The audience laughed. Just like Homer laughed when he was told he'd permanently lost 5% of his brain. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015. He said it isn't true. He said it's fan speculation. He dismissed it. But he didn't explain why nobody ages. He didn't address the tonal shift after season 4. He didn't explain why God told Homer his time was coming 6 months before the coma. He didn't explain why the show has become progressively more surreal with every passing season, in exactly the pattern you'd expect from a deteriorating brain struggling to maintain a coherent simulation. He just said it isn't true, and the interviewer moved on. The fans didn't move on, because the theory does something that no official explanation has ever done. It makes the show make sense. All of it. Every single piece. The aging freeze, the tonal shift, the celebrity flood, the increasingly cartoonish plots, the reset button that erases consequences between episodes. The fact that Homer can survive absolutely anything, endure anything, recover from anything because nothing is actually happening to his body. His body is in a hospital bed. Only his mind is in Springfield. And his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one telling the story. And here is the part that stays with you long after you close the browser tab. If the coma theory is true, then the emotional core of The Simpsons isn't comedy, it's tragedy. Homer's deepest, most desperate wish, the thing his dying brain is spending all of its remaining energy trying to create and sustain and protect, is so simple it breaks your heart. He wants his family. That's it. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous little boy. He wants Lisa to still be playing her saxophone in her room. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold. He wants Friday night at the Simpsons house on Evergreen Terrace to last forever. And in the coma, it does. The dream gives him everything he ever wanted. His family preserved in amber. His children never growing up. His wife never leaving. His life never ending. Homer's coma isn't a nightmare. It's the only heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house on Evergreen Terrace where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold and nobody ever has to say goodbye. The coma theory doesn't ruin The Simpsons. It makes every single episode an act of love. A dying man dreaming about his family because they are the only thing in his life that was ever worth dreaming about. And every time Homer survives something impossible, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and everything goes back to normal, it isn't lazy writing. It's Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, if the dream stops, if the simulation finally crashes, then Homer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed, how old his children really are, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed, or worse, not waking up at all. That's the Homer coma theory. Homer Simpson has been dreaming since April 1993. Every episode you have watched since then is a love letter written by an unconscious father to a family he cannot reach. The show will never confirm this, but it will never disprove it either, because the evidence is baked into the structure of the show itself. Nobody ages. Reality keeps getting stranger, and Homer always finds his way home by the end of the episode, because in the dream, he never left. Section 3. Who really shot Mar Burns? Before you say Maggie, we know the show told us it was Maggie. Season 7, Episode 1. Who shot Mr. Burns? Part 2. Case closed. Baby did it. Move on. Except the case was never really closed, because the evidence doesn't add up the way the show wants you to think it does. And the more carefully you look at this mystery, the more you realize that the official answer might be the biggest cover-up in Springfield history. Let's go back to the beginning. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. The summer of 1995. The Simpsons pulled off something that had never been attempted by an animated show before, a genuine whodunit cliffhanger, a mystery designed so meticulously that the show's creators invited viewers across America to participate in a national contest to guess the shooter. The winner would be animated into an actual episode. Fox promoted it like a cultural event. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in special, Springfield's Most Wanted, treating the fictional crime like an actual unsolved case. There were hotlines. There were in-store promotions. The Simpsons that summer wasn't just a television show, it was a national puzzle. And the puzzle was this. Mr. Burns had gone too far. He had stolen an oil well discovered beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget in the process. He had shut down Moe's Tavern by bankrupting its owner. He had created a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield retirement castle. He had injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog. And for his grand finale, he built a massive mechanical sun-blocking disc and used it to blot out the sun over the entire town. Not figuratively. Burns literally stole the sunlight from Springfield so that every resident would be forced to purchase their electricity from his power plant at whatever price he chose to charge. When Smithers Burns's loyal, decades-long assistant protested, Burns fired him on the spot. By the end of Part 1, every single person in Springfield had a genuine motive to want Burns dead. The show took its time establishing those motives for dozens of characters. Homer, because Burns has never once been able to remember his name, despite Homer working for him for years, a running humiliation that had finally pushed Homer to his breaking point. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its oil revenue and its programs along with it. Grandpa Abe, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his livelihood. Tito Puente, because Burns cut the music program. Moe, because his bar went under. And even Smithers, freshly fired and spiraling into something that looked a lot like a breakdown. The entire town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns. Multiple characters were shown carrying weapons. The tension was thick enough to cut. Then Burns collapsed, a single gunshot wound. He staggered into the town square, onto the sundial, and fell. His hands landed on two specific letters, W and S. Or, from Burns's perspective, from the ground looking up, M and S. The ambulance took him away. The screen went dark. America waited an entire summer. Here is what the show told us when the answer came. When Part 2 aired in September 1995, the investigation plays out like a comedic procedural. Chief Wiggum and the Springfield police fumble through the case with characteristic incompetence. Smithers confesses almost immediately, but his confession falls apart when it becomes clear that he was blackout drunk at the time and actually shot someone else entirely. Old Jasper, in his wooden leg. Smithers shot a different person, in a different location, at a different time. Wrong victim, wrong crime. Smithers is eliminated. One by one, the other suspects are ruled out. Skinner has an alibi. Moe has an alibi. Tito Puente has possibly the greatest alibi in the history of television. A full musical number performed in real time, explaining that he channeled his rage into a samba and was doing exactly that when Burns was shot. The investigation stalls. Then police find a key piece of evidence, an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA analysis is performed. The eyelash belongs to a Simpson. The evidence points to Homer. His fingerprints are on the gun. He had the clearest motive of anyone in Springfield. Homer is arrested, he is about to be convicted, and then Burns wakes up from his coma and identifies his shooter. It was Maggie, baby Maggie Simpson. According to Burns's account, he encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from his holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Mystery solved. Except it wasn't. And the more you look at the evidence, the more the official answer starts to fall apart. Let's start with the contest. Fox invited viewers across America to submit their guesses for who shot Burns. The prize was substantial. The winner would be animated into a future episode. Thousands upon thousands of entries came in. And according to the DVD commentary for the episodes, produced by the actual writers and producers of the show, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of entries guessed the correct answer. Nobody won. The person who received the prize was chosen at random from the pool of contestants. Since they didn't have the right answer, they received a cash payment instead of being animated into the show. The writers acknowledge on the commentary that they were aware of exactly one person who posted the correct answer to a Simpsons newsgroup online on the night the original broadcast aired. But this person was using a college internet account. By the time the contest ended and producers tried to track them down, the account was gone, deactivated. They literally could not find the one person who got it right. They issued an open invitation on the DVD release for this person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. Think carefully about what this means. The show's creators designed a mystery. They told the public it was solvable from the clues presented in part 1. They built a national contest around the premise that viewers could figure it out. They promoted it for an entire summer. And when the answer was finally revealed, essentially nobody in the general public had figured it out. Either the clues were insufficient, the red herrings were too effective, or the answer didn't logically follow from the evidence the way the show claimed it did. Or, and this is the possibility the show has never acknowledged, the answer the writers chose wasn't actually the right answer. It was just the answer they landed on. Let's look at the clues themselves. Burns falls on the sundial. His hands point to W and S, or from his perspective, M and S. The show tells us this means Maggie Simpson. M for Maggie, S for Simpson. Case closed. Except Burns himself stated canonically, on the record, that his hands pointing at those letters was not intentional. He didn't deliberately position himself to spell out his attacker's initials. He fell. He landed where he landed. The sundial clue, the central piece of evidence the show uses to justify its answer, was explicitly described by the victim as a coincidence. The most famous clue in Simpsons history is, according to the only person who could know whether it was a clue, meaningless. Then there's the gun. Burns carried a gun in a holster. Shortly before the shooting, the holster is shown empty in a scene that most viewers miss on a first watch. The gun was already missing from his person before the attack. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon. This means the shooter was someone who didn't bring their own gun to the town meeting, someone who wasn't planning violence, who encountered Burns's gun by chance and acted impulsively. A baby finding a gun on the ground fits this profile. So does a dozen other characters who weren't carrying weapons that night. Burns's last words before being shot were, "Oh, it's you!" He recognized his attacker. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't afraid. He said, "It's you," the way you'd acknowledge someone you've met before but don't consider a threat. Does Mr. Burns recognize Maggie Simpson? Has he ever had a meaningful interaction with her prior to this episode? The show doesn't establish a relationship between Burns and Maggie before the shooting. Burns barely recognizes Homer, and Homer works for him. The idea that Burns would look at a baby in a parking lot and calmly say, "Oh, it's you," as if acknowledging a familiar acquaintance, doesn't work for a man who cannot remember his own employee's name. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting. In season 18, over a decade after the original episode, Homer claims on camera that he was actually the one who shot Burns. He just says it, out loud, on camera, and nobody reacts. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the richest man in Springfield, and the show treats it like a throwaway line. Either Homer is lying for attention, which is entirely possible given his character, or the original verdict was wrong and Homer knows it because he's the one who actually pulled the trigger. And if Homer did it, then Maggie was framed. A baby was blamed for a crime committed by her father. And the evidence that supposedly proved Maggie's guilt, the DNA, the sundial, the testimony of a man who had just woken up from a coma with a bullet wound in him, was either manufactured, misinterpreted, or both. One of the most compelling alternate theories comes from a reading that argues Marge was the real shooter. The case is surprisingly strong. Marge is a devoted mother. She watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, and steal the sun from her entire town. She had every reason to want Burns gone. And Burns had previously fallen in love with Marge in the episode Marge Gets a Job, which the theory argues explains why he wouldn't identify her as the shooter. He protected her, he took the bullet, woke up, and rather than name the woman he'd been infatuated with, he pointed at the sundial and let the town draw its own conclusions. Maggie became the answer because Maggie was convenient. A baby cannot be prosecuted. Chief Wiggum says it himself. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect scapegoat. An infant too young to deny the accusation, too young to understand what she was being accused of, and too young to ever be punished for it. If someone in Springfield's power structure wanted to protect the real shooter, blaming Maggie was the cleanest possible solution. And the show knows this holds water. The final shot of part 2 shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone has left. She looks around carefully. She confirms nobody is watching. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as confession. Maggie did it. She knows what she did. but you could just as easily read it as a baby imitating something she witnessed. She watched someone shoot Burns. She's repeating the motion because that's what babies do. They mimic adults. They replay what they've seen. Maggie isn't confessing, she's remembering. And the difference between those two readings, confession versus memory, is the entire question the show never actually answers. The alternate endings make the ambiguity official. A complete alternate conclusion was animated in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter. Full length, fully voiced, fully produced. Shown in The Simpsons' 138th episode Spectacular, a clip show hosted by Troy McClure, who dismisses the Smithers ending by saying it wouldn't have made sense because all the Simpson DNA evidence would have had to be ignored, which would be, he says, downright nutty. That specific phrase is a reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, in which a jury had recently set aside DNA evidence to reach an acquittal. The show is winking directly at you. It is telling you that ignoring DNA evidence happens all the time. It's telling you that the official answer isn't necessarily the right answer. It's telling you, directly and explicitly, that evidence points in whatever direction the people in power want it to point. Troy McClure is not dismissing a conspiracy. He's describing one. There was also an early draft of the script in which Barney Gumble was the shooter. The writers considered it seriously enough to develop it. They planned to send Barney to prison. This was abandoned. But it means the show's own creators cycled through multiple different shooters before landing on Maggie. The answer wasn't predetermined by the clues. The clues were adjusted to fit whatever answer the writers eventually chose. The mystery was reverse engineered. The evidence was made to point where the show needed it to point. Which is, of course, exactly what someone inside Springfield who wanted to frame a baby would have done. And here's the question that nobody asks. In a town where every single person had a motive, where dozens of people were carrying weapons, where the victim had just stolen the light from the sky, how is it possible that only one person acted? Springfield is not a town known for restraint. These people riot at the drop of a hat. They form mobs over trivial disputes. They have burned things down over misunderstandings. But when Burns blocks out the sun and threatens the survival of every living thing in the community, only one shot is fired? Either Springfield's population is significantly more docile than the show has ever portrayed them, or the shooting wasn't as spontaneous as the official story requires. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The writers stand behind it. But the contest nobody won, the clues that Burns himself said were accidental, the fully produced alternate endings, Homer's unexamined confession in season 18, and the final shot of Maggie mimicking gunfire in an empty room, all of it suggests that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never actually solved. It was closed. And in Springfield, those are two very different things. Section 4. How is MR? Burns still alive? This isn't a rhetorical question. This isn't a joke about cartoon logic. Within the established canon of The Simpsons, Charles Montgomery Burns is a medical impossibility. His age has been stated, implied, and contradicted across dozens of episodes, but every version of the timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 1800s. He has referenced personal memories from before the turn of the 20th century. He has told stories about events from the 1910s as though he experienced them firsthand. He has described working relationships with historical figures who died before most of the show's audience was born. By the most conservative estimate, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the most liberal reading of the show's continuity, he might be pushing 140. And he doesn't just exist. He functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. He manipulates municipal politics. He orchestrates schemes that require sustained cognitive effort, long-term planning, and a working understanding of modern technology, modern finance, and modern law. His body is frail. His physical strength is almost non-existent. A moderately strong breeze represents a meaningful physical challenge to Burns, but his mind is razor-sharp. Mr. Burns is arguably the most strategically intelligent character in Springfield, operating with a ruthlessness and precision that nobody in town can match. And he has been operating at that level for longer than any human being should be capable of sustained consciousness. The show addresses this directly in the Springfield Files. As we discussed, Burns undergoes a weekly medical regimen so extreme that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 7 more days. Then he needs another dose. Without it, he dies. Miss one treatment and Burns is gone. The margin for error is 0. His life is maintained the way you maintain a machine, through scheduled servicing. Skip the service interval and the machine fails. And the treatment involves radiation. Of course it does. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, the man whose facility has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to sustain his own biological functions. Burns isn't just profiting from radiation, he's powered by it. His body has been so fundamentally altered by decades of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through normal cellular processes. He requires external radiation input the way a normal human requires food and water. This explains something the show has depicted repeatedly but never addressed: Burns's immune system. In one of the most famous scenes in the series, Burns visits a doctor who informs him that he has every disease known to medical science. Every single one. Simultaneously. The doctor explains that Burns's diseases are all present in his body at the same time, but exist in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one canceling out the others. The doctor compares it to 3 people trying to fit through a doorway at once. None of them can get through. Burns's diseases are all trying to kill him simultaneously, but because they're all present at once, they create a biological gridlock that prevents any single illness from progressing. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome. His conclusion is that Burns is the sickest man in the United States but functionally indestructible, because everything that should kill him is being blocked by everything else that should kill him. This is played for laughs. It's one of the show's most quoted scenes. But if you accept the radiation theory, it makes a terrifying kind of sense. Burns's body isn't maintaining this disease equilibrium through any natural process. The weekly radiation treatments are managing it. The treatments don't cure his diseases. They hold every illness in perfect stasis, balanced against every other illness, preventing any single condition from gaining dominance and ending his life. It's not medicine in any conventional sense. It's nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and his weekly treatments are the equivalent of adjusting the control rods to prevent a meltdown. Too little radiation and the system collapses. Too much and it goes critical. The treatment window is precise. The margin for error is 0. Now consider Smithers in this light. Wayland Smithers is not just a loyal assistant. He is not just Burns's most devoted employee. He is Burns's life support system. Smithers manages Burns's schedule. Smithers ensures Burns makes every single weekly appointment without exception. Smithers monitors Burns's physical condition with a vigilance that borders on obsessive, and the show has always framed this as a character trait, a comedic quirk, evidence of Smithers's unrequited devotion to a man who barely notices him. But within the logic of the Burns immortality theory, Smithers's behavior isn't quirky, it's rational. He knows that his absence is a death sentence. He knows that if he ever leaves, if he's ever fired, ever incapacitated, ever removed from his position, Burns will miss a treatment. The disease equilibrium will collapse. Every illness in Burns's body will surge forward simultaneously. Smithers isn't devoted to Burns out of love alone. He's devoted because he understands on a precise clinical level that his continued presence is the only thing keeping Burns alive. That knowledge is the foundation of their entire relationship. It is the chain that binds Smithers to a man who exploits him, dismisses him, and occasionally humiliates him, because leaving isn't an option when leaving means watching someone die. Burns's connection to historical events adds another layer to the immortality question that the show has never chosen to address. Burns has been depicted interacting with or referencing an enormous number of historical moments. He served in World War II. Though his role was morally questionable at best, the show has depicted him engaging in activities during the war that would not reflect well on him, and that he has been careful to keep buried. He stole a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during wartime and kept it hidden for decades. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale at an age when Yale was already old. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as history but as personal memory, as a time he lived through, experienced, and in some ways misses. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty extends back centuries. The show has depicted the Burns family tree as one of the oldest and most continuously powerful lineages in American history. They weren't just wealthy. They were the kind of wealthy that shapes nations, that builds infrastructure, and then charges everyone else to use it, that exists so far above the law that the concept of legal accountability becomes theoretical rather than practical. Burns inherited this legacy and has been extending it for well over a century. He didn't just build an empire, he maintained one that was already ancient when he took control. The question the show never asks, is Burns unique, or has his family always found ways to extend lifespans beyond normal human limits? If the Burns dynasty has existed for centuries, and if the current Burns has survived for over 100 years through artificial means, is it possible that previous Burns patriarchs employed similar strategies? Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before any of the technology that currently keeps Burns alive, did the Burns family use other methods? The show doesn't say, but it does establish that the Burns family has been in continuous control of their fortune for longer than most American institutions have existed. That kind of continuity doesn't happen through normal generational succession. It requires either extraordinary luck or extraordinary measures. Burns has come closer to dying than almost any other character on the show. He's been shot, he's been hospitalized dozens of times. He's collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been poisoned, been abandoned in the wilderness, and every single time he comes back. Not through cartoon resilience the way Homer survives things. Homer endures damage and heals because the show needs him to. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of wealth that ensures that no matter what happens to his body, there will always be someone standing by with the resources and the knowledge to put him back together. Homer's survival is passive. Burns's survival is engineered. Every dollar he has ever spent, every institution he has ever compromised, every politician he has ever purchased, every doctor he has ever retained, it all serves one purpose. Keep Burns alive. Keep the treatments coming. Keep the diseases balanced. Keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, everything he built dies with him. And the thing that Burns built more than his fortune, more than his power plant, more than his monopoly on Springfield's economy is a system. A self-sustaining loop in which the town needs the power plant needs Burns, Burns needs the treatments, and the treatments need the resources that only Burns's wealth can provide. Springfield can't kill Burns because Springfield can't survive without Burns. The scariest version of the Burns immortality theory isn't that he might live forever. It's that Springfield needs him to. The man is monstrous. He is venal and cruel and indifferent to human suffering in ways the show documents in extraordinary detail across hundreds of episodes. And the town that he has poisoned, that he has exploited, that he has kept small and compliant and too cognitively damaged to resist that town is entirely dependent on him for its continued existence. He's not immortal in any mystical sense. He's something more mundane and more frightening. He's too expensive to die. And Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if his treatment schedule holds, will be forever. Section 5. The Principal and the Pauper. The episode that exposed how Springfield really works. There is one episode in the entire history of The Simpsons that fans have never forgiven. One episode that is consistently ranked among the worst the show ever produced. One episode that is cited, again and again, as the moment The Simpsons stopped caring about its own characters and its own continuity. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper. It aired in Season 9, and the hatred it inspires is ironically proof of exactly what the episode is trying to tell you. Here's what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, a stranger walks in, a man nobody recognizes. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war in Southeast Asia, believed dead, but who survived, escaped, and came home to find that someone else had been living his life for 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street punk, a petty criminal, a kid with no prospects and no identity worth protecting. He was drafted into the army. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian was the one who had to go back to Springfield and tell Skinner's mother, Agnes, that her son was dead. But when he arrived, Agnes saw who she needed to see. She needed her son to be alive. Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a family or a home or an identity worth keeping, just went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother. He lived inside a stolen identity for 20 years, until the real Skinner walked through the door and the whole thing collapsed. The town holds a meeting. Both Skinners are present. The truth is fully exposed. Everyone in Springfield knows that their principal is a fraud, and the town votes not on whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not on whether to restore the real Skinner's identity and rights. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree that the imposter is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the real one, the war hero who survived a prisoner of war camp and came home to find his entire life stolen, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. The judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention the truth again, under penalty of torture. Fans hated this. The criticism was immediate, sustained, and in some cases personal. Harry Shearer, the actor who voices both Skinner and Burns, publicly stated his displeasure with the storyline. Critics argued that the episode destroyed one of the show's most beloved supporting characters by revealing that everything we thought we knew about him was built on a lie. His military service fiction, his relationship with his mother stolen, his decades-long dynamic with Bart premised on a false identity. Everything that made Skinner Skinner was, retroactively, a fabrication. But here's what nobody wants to acknowledge. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. It just says the quiet part out loud. Springfield has always operated this way. The town has always chosen comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. The town has always agreed, through some collective and unspoken mechanism, to forget whatever doesn't fit the narrative it needs to maintain. The only difference between this episode and every other episode is that the principal and the pauper shows you the mechanism. It shows you the vote. It shows you the legal decree. It shows you the literal, physical expulsion of truth from the community. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets to normal after something world-changing happens, it happens off-screen, between episodes, in the gap we never see. The Principal and the Pauper is the one time the show let you watch it happen in real time. Consider how many times Springfield has experienced events that should permanently alter the town's reality. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. It has been invaded, it has been sealed under a government dome, it has survived nuclear near misses, environmental catastrophes, and the literal blocking of the sun. And every single time, by the next episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody remembers. Nobody references the previous disaster. The slate is clean. Fans call this episodic storytelling. The coma theory calls it a dreaming brain resetting between cycles. The radiation theory calls it cognitive damage from chronic exposure. But the Principal and the Pauper offers a fourth explanation. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset collectively, deliberately, through an unspoken social contract that says, we will not acknowledge what happened. We will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. We will treat the lie as truth and the truth as criminal. And anyone who breaks this contract will be removed from the community. That isn't a cartoon trope. That's how real communities work. Small towns in particular have a terrifying capacity for collective denial. Scandals get buried, crimes get forgotten, uncomfortable truths get rewritten through decades of repeated telling until the official version is the only version anyone remembers. The Principal and the Pauper didn't break The Simpsons. It diagnosed Springfield. It showed you that the town's amnesia isn't a glitch in the writing. It's a feature of the community, a defense mechanism employed by a population that cannot afford to confront the reality of its own situation. Because if Springfield remembered the dome, it would have to acknowledge the pollution. If it acknowledged the pollution, it would have to confront the power plant. If it confronted the power plant, it would have to challenge Burns. If it challenged Burns, the economy would collapse. If the economy collapsed, the town would die. So they forget. They vote to forget. They make it illegal to remember. And anyone who remembers too much, anyone who insists on the truth, who shows up with proof that the official narrative is a lie, gets tied to a train car and expelled from the community. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He was a man who arrived with irrefutable proof that the story the town was telling itself was false. And the town's response wasn't gratitude, it was criminalization. They made truth illegal and exiled the messenger. That's not a comedy beat. That is the show telling you, with unusual directness, exactly how Springfield maintains its impossible reality, through consensus, through denial, through the systematic destruction of anyone who threatens the agreed-upon version of events. And if the coma theory is true, this episode takes on an even darker meaning. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's unconscious mind invented a scenario where an entire town votes to sustain a lie, because that's what Homer needs to believe. He needs to believe that lies can be maintained forever. He needs to believe that a stolen identity can become real through collective agreement. He needs to believe that the fake version of a life can replace the real one, and that nobody will ever force a reckoning, because that's what Homer's coma is. A fake life replacing a real one, a dream pretending to be reality. And as long as the Dreamtown of Springfield keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And the real Seymour Skinner is still somewhere out there, tied to a train car, exiled from his own existence, the last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the most dangerous person in Springfield. Maggie Simpson doesn't talk. She doesn't walk reliably. She communicates primarily through pacifier noises and the occasional pointed stare. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. And in that time, without saying a word, without walking more than a few steps without falling over, she has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She led a daycare rebellion against a tyrannical caretaker. She saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations across multiple episodes. She has demonstrated problem-solving abilities that exceed those of adults 3 times her age. She was tested and found to possess intelligence that shouldn't exist in a child who hasn't learned to form full sentences yet. And through all of it, every remarkable thing she has ever done, she maintains her silence. Not because she can't speak, because she chooses not to. Let's start with the shooting. We've already gone through the evidence and the alternate theories. But whether or not Maggie intentionally pulled the trigger, the aftermath is what matters here. A baby was identified as the person who shot the richest man in Springfield. The police investigated. The evidence was examined. And the official conclusion was, yes, this infant committed an act of violence against a grown man, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. Chief Wiggum's exact words were that no jury in the world would convict a baby. Case closed. But look at the final shot of that episode one more time. Everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She looks around carefully, deliberately, confirming that nobody is watching. And then she moves her pacifier in a gesture that mimics pulling a trigger. This is not reflexive behavior. This is not a baby randomly moving her mouth. This is a 1-year-old child demonstrating awareness of what happened, awareness that the act she committed had significance, and awareness that performing this gesture in front of witnesses would have consequences. She waited until she was alone. She checked her surroundings. Then she reenacted the shooting in private. That sequence of actions requires situational awareness, memory, causal reasoning, and impulse control. Those are not traits associated with infants. Those are traits associated with someone who understands exactly what they are doing and has decided that secrecy is the optimal strategy. Now consider The Longest Daycare. This is a theatrical short film released in 2012, screened in cinemas before Ice Age, Continental Drift. It was nominated for an Academy Award. And it is 7 minutes of Maggie Simpson, demonstrating intelligence that would be remarkable in a competent adult, let alone a baby who can't walk without falling. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped off at the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare run with authoritarian efficiency by a woman named Miss Finster. Inside, Maggie encounters a caterpillar about to become a butterfly. She wants to protect it. Another baby, a bully named Gerald, the baby with the monobrow who has been Maggie's nemesis since season 1, wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the daycare staff, and the facility's entire security apparatus to save the caterpillar and release it into the world. She does this without speaking a single word. She does it through observation, planning, improvisation, and the kind of adaptive problem-solving that most adults genuinely struggle with. She reads the environment. She identifies threats in real time. She develops counter-strategies on the fly. She executes multi-step plans that require precise timing, spatial awareness, and the ability to model other people's behavior and predict their actions in advance. And she does all of this while being physically limited to the motor skills of a 1-year-old. Her body cannot keep up with her mind. She falls. She stumbles. She crawls when she should be running. But her decision-making is flawless. Every choice she makes in that short film is the correct choice. Every move is optimized. She is operating at a cognitive level that her physical development cannot support, and she succeeds anyway because her intelligence compensates for every physical limitation her body imposes. The show has tested Maggie's intelligence directly, across multiple episodes. The results vary because the show treats these moments as quick gags, rather than sustained storylines. But the pattern is unmistakable. Maggie consistently, repeatedly, across decades of episodes, demonstrates cognitive abilities that no 1-year-old should possess, and the family consistently, repeatedly, fails to notice. Because they're too busy dealing with Homer's disasters and Bart's pranks and Lisa's crusades to pay attention to the baby who has been quietly solving problems in the background. And that's the key word, quietly. Maggie's defining characteristic isn't her intelligence, it is her silence. Her first word, daddy, was voiced by Elizabeth Taylor in what amounted to a cameo appearance. It happened once, in a single episode, and was never repeated. Since then, Maggie has gone 36 years without developing language in any meaningful way. She communicates through gestures and facial expressions and the occasional contextually significant sound. She is surrounded by a family of extremely verbal people. Homer never stops talking. Marge never stops worrying out loud. Bart never stops provoking. Lisa never stops lecturing. The Simpson household is a wall of constant noise, and in the middle of it, Maggie sits in silence, watching, listening, processing. The theory, and it's a theory supported by a substantial amount of in-show evidence, is that Maggie's silence is not developmental delay. It is a conscious strategic decision made by a mind intelligent enough to understand the value of not being noticed. Look at what happens to the intelligent women in this family. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. Lisa is a genius. Lisa has an IQ that dwarfs everyone in her household and most of the adults in Springfield. And what has that intelligence gotten her? Isolation? Mockery? Dismissal. Lisa speaks up and gets ignored. Lisa challenges authority and gets punished. Lisa tries to improve the world around her and gets crushed by the weight of a community that doesn't want to be improved. Lisa's intelligence is her greatest gift and her greatest curse, because she uses it visibly. She wears it on the outside. She announces herself as the smartest person in the room, and the room responds by making sure she knows how little that matters. Maggie watched this happen. Maggie has been watching it happen since the day she was born. She watched her sister fight every single day for recognition and receive nothing but resistance. She watched the smartest person in the family be consistently overlooked, undervalued, and dismissed by a household and a community that rewards stupidity and punishes insight. And Maggie learned a different lesson. Not the lesson Lisa learned, which is to keep fighting regardless of the cost. Maggie learned the opposite. Silence is power. Invisibility is armor. The less they notice you, the more you can accomplish. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, what happens? The family doesn't notice. The community doesn't notice. Burns was shot, and the investigation focused on everyone except the baby because who suspects a baby? The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. Every heroic act, every display of intelligence, every moment where Maggie saves the day, it happens below the radar, in the margins, in the spaces where nobody is paying attention. And Maggie has ensured that nobody pays attention to her by maintaining the most effective disguise available to her. She pretends to be exactly what everyone expects a baby to be: quiet, passive, helpless, dependent. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. She is the most capable member of the Simpson family, and she has spent 36 years making sure nobody figures that out. Now connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment creates biological mutations, And if those mutations affect each person differently based on their genetics, exposure level, and whatever other variables make each human body unique, then Maggie represents the opposite extreme from Homer. Homer's mutation reduced his intelligence to clinical disability levels. Maggie's mutation amplified hers to levels that standardized testing cannot measure. Same environmental cause, same family, same contaminated water and irradiated air. But where the father's brain was diminished, the daughter's was amplified. Homer and Maggie are two sides of the same radioactive coin. He is what happens when mutation takes something away. She is what happens when mutation gives something extraordinary. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on almost unbearable weight. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode is the product of an unconscious mind trying to hold on to his family, then Maggie's brilliance is Homer's deepest hope for his youngest child, projected onto the dream. He cannot see her grow up, he cannot watch her develop. He cannot hear her speak or see her walk or learn what kind of person she becomes. So, in the dream, he makes her extraordinary. He gives her an intelligence that transcends her age. He makes her capable of things no baby could actually do. Because in his coma, Homer needs to believe that Maggie will be okay even without him there to protect her. Her genius isn't just a mutation. In the coma reading, it's a prayer. But back in Springfield, in the waking world, if there still is one, there's a darker reading. Maggie doesn't speak because she's learned that speaking gets you nothing in this town. She doesn't reveal her intelligence because intelligence is punished in Springfield. She watches everything. She remembers everything. She understands everything. And she waits. For what? The show never tells us. Maggie's endgame is the last truly unsolved mystery of the Simpson family. She is the only character whose future is completely unknown because the show has never definitively revealed what she is actually capable of. But we've seen glimpses. We've seen her shoot a man. We've seen her command a room full of babies. We've seen her solve problems that stump adults. We've seen her save her family in ways they never fully understood. Maggie Simpson is 1 year old. She cannot walk without falling. She cannot speak beyond a few sounds. And she is the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace. She just hasn't decided what to do about it yet. And maybe that's the scariest thing about Maggie. Not what she's done, but what she's waiting to do. Behind that pacifier, behind those enormous eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate silence, something is thinking. Something is planning. Something is watching the family and the town and the world with an intelligence that nobody suspects and nobody can contain. When Maggie finally decides to act, Springfield won't see it coming. Nobody will, because that's exactly how Maggie designed it. Section 7. The Simpsons predictions how the show shapes the future. Let's get the famous ones out of the way first. In the year 2000, the episode Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president of the United States. In that same episode, Lisa's predecessor in the Oval Office is identified as Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before Trump won the 2016 election. 16 years. The show depicted a Trump presidency as a joke about the absurd direction American celebrity culture was heading. And then America headed exactly in that direction. The internet lost its collective mind. Screenshots went viral. The Simpsons predicted Trump became a meme that transcended the show's actual fan base and entered mainstream cultural consciousness. People who hadn't watched The Simpsons in 2 decades were suddenly sharing clips and asking, how did they know? And that's just the headline. In a 1995 episode, the show depicted a device that looks remarkably similar to a modern smartwatch, a wrist-mounted communication device that the episode treats as futuristic technology. In a 1994 episode, Homer goes to space with Buzz Aldrin, decades before commercial space tourism became a reality marketed to civilians. In a 1998 episode, Homer stumbles across a mathematical equation that appears to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which wouldn't be experimentally confirmed until 2012. In a 1999 episode, Homer proposes a theory about the shape of the universe involving a toroidal donut-shaped geometry. Years later, cosmologists found radiation patterns, suggesting the universe might actually have properties consistent with a toroidal topology. In a 1993 episode called Marge in Chains, a flu virus originating from Asia spreads to Springfield, causing mass panic, panic buying, a frantic search for a cure, and a community response that involves some deeply questionable decisions. The episode aired 27 years before COVID-19. During the chaos of that fictional outbreak, the townspeople accidentally release a swarm of killer bees, which felt grimly prophetic when Asian giant hornets, immediately dubbed murder hornets by the media, showed up in the United States during the actual 2020 pandemic. In 1996, the episode Homer Palooza featured a joke in which the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra while under the influence. In 2024, 28 years after the joke aired, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years between the joke and the reality. In a 1998 episode, the show depicted Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox. This actually happened in 2019. Across multiple episodes, the show depicted video calling technology, autocorrect failures, surveillance culture, tablet computers, and social media dynamics years before any of these things existed in the form we know them today. The list is long enough to fill its own documentary. Every time a new apparent prediction surfaces, the internet responds with the same mixture of amazement and suspicion. How are they doing this? Is there a conspiracy? Is The Simpsons some kind of prophetic text hidden inside a cartoon? The answer, according to the people who actually make the show, is much simpler and considerably less satisfying. Al Jean, executive producer, addressed the prediction phenomenon directly. His explanation was blunt. If you throw enough darts, you're going to hit some bullseyes. That's it. That is the official position from inside the show. The Simpsons has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, and satirical observations about American culture, technology, politics, and society. When you generate that volume of content over that span of time, some of it is going to align with future events through sheer statistical probability. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its peak seasons, put it more plainly. There are very few cases where The Simpsons predicted something. It's mainly just coincidence because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. Fact-checking organizations have systematically debunked many of the most widely shared claimed predictions, explaining that the show's output creates an enormous number of opportunities for coincidences to appear, and that most of these apparent predictions have simple explanations. Many of them weren't predictions at all. They were trend extrapolations. The writers didn't predict Trump's presidency. They observed that Trump had been publicly flirting with running for office since the late 1980s and wrote a joke about the logical extreme of celebrity politics in an era of declining institutional credibility. They didn't predict the Disney-Fox merger. They observed that media consolidation was an accelerating trend and wrote a gag about a mega corporation swallowing its competitors. They didn't predict smartwatches. They observed that technology was getting smaller and more personal and imagined what a wrist-mounted computer might eventually look like. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been one of the most educated in the history of American television. Multiple writers hold advanced degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other elite institutions. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, and political theory. These aren't people pulling guesses out of thin air. They are intelligent, well-read observers of American culture who spend their careers studying trends, analyzing patterns, and extrapolating current trajectories to their absurd but logical conclusions. They're not predicting the future. They're reading the present more carefully than most people do and then pushing it forward a few steps to see where it lands. But here's where it gets genuinely strange. Because while the statistical explanation covers most of the predictions, it doesn't explain all of them. Some of the coincidences are so specific, so precise, so eerily detailed that probability begins to feel inadequate. The Trump prediction didn't just forecast that a celebrity might run for president. It specified Trump by name, and it depicted him descending an escalator in a visual sequence that mirrors almost exactly the announcement he made in 2015. The episode about Siegfried and Roy didn't just joke about exotic animals being dangerous. It depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers, which is almost exactly what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers. These aren't vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details aligning with specific future events in ways that cannot be fully explained by volume and probability alone. And this is where the most interesting theory about the predictions comes in. Not a conspiracy theory, not time travel. Something more interesting than either of those. The Simpsons doesn't predict the future. The Simpsons shapes the future. Not through magic, not through prophecy, through cultural influence. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced, and most deeply embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current viewers have been alive. Its jokes have entered the American lexicon. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. Millions of people see it. It becomes a reference point. It becomes something people quote and share and think about when they see Trump on the news for the next 16 years. The joke doesn't predict the future. The joke makes the future feel familiar. It primes the cultural imagination. It makes the idea of a Trump presidency feel less like a shocking impossibility and more like an inevitable punchline. And when the punchline arrives, when reality catches up to the joke, it doesn't feel like prediction. It feels like recognition. The show didn't predict Disney buying Fox. The show made media consolidation feel inevitable by depicting it as obvious satire. When the acquisition actually happened, the cultural response wasn't shock. It was, of course they did. The Simpsons already told us this would happen. The show's satire didn't forecast the future. It normalized the future. It took trends that were already in motion and presented them as accomplished facts. And when the facts eventually materialized, the audience experienced a sense of déjà vu that felt like prophecy but was actually the result of having been culturally prepared for the outcome years in advance. Springfield doesn't reflect America. At this point, America has become Springfield. The show held up a mirror for 36 years, and we stared into it so long that we started to resemble what we saw. The nuclear power plant, with its non-existent safety culture. The corrupt billionaire who faces no meaningful consequences. The incompetent government that can barely function in a crisis. The population too distracted and too comfortable and too cognitively exhausted to notice how thoroughly it's being exploited. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset. The collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to happen over and over because nobody is allowed to remember the last time it happened. Springfield isn't a prediction of where America was heading. Springfield is a diagnosis of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first. And here is the final piece that makes the prediction phenomenon genuinely unsettling. The Simpsons has also made jokes that haven't come true. Thousands of them. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and technologies that never materialized. Jokes about political outcomes that went the other way. Jokes about cultural shifts that never happened. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody shares them. Nobody builds theories around the predictions that failed. Because confirmation bias only works in one direction. We remember the hits. We forget the misses. And when you produce 800 episodes containing thousands of satirical observations about the trajectory of American culture, and then you filter those observations through confirmation bias so that only the accurate ones get remembered and amplified, you end up with a highlight reel that looks exactly like prophecy. The predictions aren't supernatural. They're not conspiratorial. They're the natural result of a brilliantly written show running for an impossibly long time, staffed by highly educated observers of American culture, producing more content than any other show in television history, and having that content filtered through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created, which is the internet. The Simpsons didn't predict the future. The Simpsons wrote so many possible futures that some of them were bound to come true, and the ones that came true are the only ones anyone remembers. But try telling that to yourself the next time a Simpsons clip from 1,998 lines up perfectly with a headline from next year. Because the truth is, even knowing how the trick works, it's still impressive to watch. Number 7. Mona Simpson, the woman who explains everything about Homer. The most important character in the history of The Simpsons barely appears in the show at all. Not Marge, not Burns, not even Homer. The most important character, the one whose absence explains everything about the Simpson family, whose story connects the power plant to Homer's psychology to the conspiracy at the heart of Springfield, is Homer's mother, Mona Simpson. And the story of what happened to her is one of the darkest things buried in this show. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official story. Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had told him his mother passed away when Homer was young. He showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother died and whose father was too cold and emotionally unavailable to fill the void she left behind. That belief shaped everything about Homer. His desperate need for approval, his clinginess toward Marge, his terror of abandonment, the way he will endure almost any humiliation rather than risk losing the people he loves, his willingness to tolerate degradation and disrespect from his employer rather than risk being alone. Homer Simpson's entire personality is a coping mechanism for maternal loss. His neediness, his emotional volatility, his hunger for love from anyone willing to offer it, it all traces back to a wound that was inflicted when he was a child and never healed. In Season 7, the show revealed that the loss was a lie. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired the 19th of November, 1995. It is widely considered one of the greatest episodes in the history of the series and one of the saddest things the show ever produced. Here is what happens. Homer fakes his own death to get out of working on a Saturday. He pushes a dummy off a cliff near the power plant and lets the town believe he's dead. When Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records and correct the error, Homer discovers something that shatters his entire understanding of his own life. According to municipal records, his mother is alive. She never died. The grave Abe showed him wasn't hers. It was the grave of Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe Simpson had been using a famous writer's headstone as a stand-in for his wife's burial site for Homer's entire life and had never once thought to correct the impression, or had thought to correct it and chosen not to. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave, mourning the son she left behind. She doesn't recognize him at first. He has changed. He has grown. He became a person while she wasn't watching a person shaped in ways she is about to understand, directly by her absence. When Homer proves who he is, their reunion is one of the most genuinely emotional scenes the show has ever produced. A grown man and his mother separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona tells him the truth. She didn't die. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she had to. Because staying would have put Homer and Abe in danger. Because the man who owned the power plant, the man Homer would eventually grow up to work for without ever knowing the connection had destroyed her life and forced her underground. The story goes back to 1969. Mona Simpson was a housewife. She was married to Abe. She had a young son named Homer. She was ordinary, unremarkable, living a quiet life in Springfield while the world outside was burning through the civil rights movement, the counterculture, the anti-war protests. And then something changed. She was radicalized. The show depicts it with characteristic absurdity but genuine emotional weight. She joined a group of activists, and their cause was legitimate. They had identified a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Not just a nuclear power plant, a germ warfare facility. A laboratory designed to produce biological weapons in Springfield, the same town where he would later build a nuclear reactor with 342 safety violations. Burns was manufacturing weapons-grade pathogens in the same community where Homer Simpson was growing up, where children were playing, where families were living their lives with no idea that the richest man in town was cooking up diseases down the road. Mona and her group broke into the lab. They detonated what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agents stored inside. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who happened to be Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police. The raid was successful, but Mona made one mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had been knocked down in the chaos. That someone was Mr. Burns. She stopped to help the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, and Burns saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI, and from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She couldn't go home. She couldn't contact her family. She couldn't hold her son or explain to him why she had to go. She kissed Homer goodbye while he was sleeping and disappeared into the night. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead. And Homer spent the next 3 decades of his life believing he was unloved. Believing he was the kind of son a mother would rather die than raise. Believing there was something fundamentally broken about him that made people leave. Now, here is where the conspiracy takes shape. Burns didn't just identify Mona to the FBI, he pursued her, actively. For decades, he held a personal grudge against a woman who had destroyed his weapons lab, and he used every resource at his disposal, his connections, his influence, his money to ensure she could never return to her family. When Mona finally comes back to Springfield in season 7, Burns recognizes her almost immediately. He spots her through a cab window and calls the authorities. The FBI comes to the Simpson house. Mona has to run again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. And this time he knows why she left. He knows who forced her out. He knows that the man responsible is his own employer. Homer works for Burns. Homer has worked for Burns his entire adult life. Homer earns his paycheck from the man who destroyed his family, and Homer doesn't connect the dots. He doesn't confront Burns. He doesn't quit. He doesn't even seem to fully process the connection between the billionaire who signs his checks and the billionaire who stole his mother. This isn't played as a joke. It's played as tragedy, because Homer Simpson is not capable of making a connection like that. His brain doesn't work that way. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of cognitive erosion from living in Springfield's contaminated environment. Homer is too damaged to understand the architecture of his own suffering. And that's the conspiracy. Burns didn't just ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. By driving Mona away when Homer was a child, Burns ensured that Homer would grow up emotionally damaged, desperate for approval, incapable of challenging authority, terrified of abandonment, the perfect employee. A man who would work at a dangerous facility for decades without meaningful complaint, because the alternative, being alone, being unloved, being abandoned again, was more frightening than any working condition. Homer doesn't work at the power plant because he's too stupid to find better employment. Homer works at the power plant because Burns broke him as a child. And the broken version of Homer is exactly the worker Burns needed. Compliant, obedient, grateful for any scrap of attention, incapable of resistance. The show confirms this with a later revelation. Burns had committed a crime that Grandpa Simpson discovered. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed that Homer would have a job at the plant no matter what, no matter how many mistakes he made, no matter how incompetent he was, no matter how many times he should have been terminated. 742 documented errors, and Homer was never permanently let go because the deal protected him. Homer's job security wasn't a cartoon convenience. It was a contractual obligation between his father and his mother's persecutor, brokered in silence, maintained in secret, and never explained to Homer because explaining it would mean explaining everything else. 3 generations of the Simpson family, broken by one man's grudge. Homer's mother was a radical who fought against a billionaire's biological weapons program. That billionaire retaliated by destroying her family. Her husband covered up the truth and made a deal with the enemy. Her son grew up believing he was worthless. He became cognitively impaired through a combination of environmental poisoning and physical brain damage. He spent his entire adult life working for the man who took his mother away from him, and Homer stands at the center of it. Too damaged to see the pattern, too dependent to break free. Strangling his son on the couch every evening in a house that runs on electricity generated by the same power plant that poisons his water and funds the empire of the man who stole his childhood. Burns didn't just take Homer's mother, he took Homer's potential. The episode Homer the Great's follow-up, the one where Homer has the crayon removed, proved this. Without the crayon, without the cognitive suppression, Homer is brilliant, articulate, capable, aware. The man Homer could have been the man he would have been if his mother had stayed, if Burns hadn't intervened, if the system hadn't conspired to keep him small and compliant and just functional enough to show up for work. That man exists inside Homer's skull, trapped behind a crayon and a lifetime of radiation damage, and a wound so old and so deep that he chose to put the crayon back rather than feel its full weight. Homer chose stupidity, but the choice was rigged from the start. Homer was never meant to be smart in Springfield. Burns made sure of that when Homer was 6 years old and his mother vanished in the night. Mona Simpson died in a later season. Her death scene is one of the show's most quietly devastating moments. Homer sits beside her. He holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew slip away for the last time. No joke, no cutaway, no reset. Just a man and his mother and the weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them in a small hospital room in a town that never deserved either of them. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been a comedy. But underneath the jokes, underneath the gags, underneath 36 seasons of Homer falling down and getting back up, there is a story about a family that was systematically destroyed by one man's power and one town's inability to resist it. Mona fought back and lost everything. Abe made a deal with the devil and buried the truth. Homer inherited the consequences and never understood why his life felt so heavy. And Burns won. Burns always wins. Because in Springfield, the man with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson will work at the power plant until he dies. Because his grandfather made a deal. Because his mother made a choice. Because the richest man in town needed a broken man in Sector 7G. And Homer was broken before he ever clocked in. Section 9. Where is Springfield? Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can identify Springfield than can name the capitals of half the actual states in the country. It has a nuclear power plant and a tire fire, and a gorge, and a harbor, and a monorail, and an elementary school, and a prison, and 2 hospitals, and a quickie mart. It has mountains, and oceans, and deserts, and farmland, and forests. It borders the states of Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky depending on which episode you're watching. It is located on the coast and also in the heartland, and also near the Canadian border and also near Mexico. Its weather ranges from blizzards to tropical heat waves within the span of a single season. Springfield does not exist in any state. Springfield exists in all of them simultaneously. The show has been deliberately contradicting itself about Springfield's location for its entire run. Every time a clue appears that seems to narrow down the possibilities, another clue appears in a different episode that nullifies it entirely. In one episode, Springfield is clearly in the north. In another, it's demonstrably in the south. Lisa's area code starts with 636, which is a Missouri prefix. The state abbreviation on some documents reads NT, which is not a real state. When Homer calls the state capital, the voice on the other end identifies the state as beginning with a vowel, which eliminates some possibilities while leaving dozens of others viable. The show teases answers and snatches them away, over and over, for 3.5 decades. Matt Groening, the show's creator, named the town after Springfield, Oregon. He admitted this in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine. He chose the name because Springfield is one of the most common city names in America, and because he grew up near Springfield, Oregon. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery was solved. And then the show kept contradicting the revelation. Episodes that aired after the interview placed Springfield in geographic contexts completely inconsistent with Oregon. The writers didn't honor Groening's confession. They kept the mystery alive because the mystery was the point. Springfield's geographic impossibility isn't a bug. It's the show's most sophisticated, long-running joke. The town has oceanfront property and mountain ranges and active volcanoes all within driving distance of each other. No real American town has that combination of features. Springfield is an architectural and geographic Frankenstein, stitched together from pieces of every American community that has ever existed. It has the industrial decay of the Rust Belt. It has the suburban sprawl of the Sun Belt. It has the small-town insularity of New England and the cultural blankness of the Midwest. It's everywhere and nowhere. It's the town you grew up in, no matter where you actually grew up. This is the intentional design philosophy. Groening has confirmed it. The show is meant to resonate with the broadest possible American audience by being set in a town that could be anyone's hometown. Every viewer can look at Springfield and see something familiar, because Springfield was built to look like everywhere. But under the theories we've been discussing, Springfield's geographic impossibility takes on a more disturbing dimension. If the radiation theory is true, if Springfield is a contamination zone where the laws of biology have been fundamentally warped by decades of nuclear exposure, why should geography be exempt? If the people of Springfield can have 4 fingers and yellow skin and survive injuries that would kill normal humans, why should the physical landscape obey the normal rules of American geography? Maybe Springfield has both mountains and oceans, because the contamination doesn't just affect biology. Maybe it affects the physical environment. Maybe whatever is leaking from those cracked cooling towers has warped the space around Springfield, compressing geographic features that should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible region. If the coma theory is true, Springfield's geography makes even more sense. Homer's dreaming brain doesn't have a precise cartographic map of America. It has impressions, feelings, fragments of every place Homer has ever visited or seen on a television screen while half asleep. Mountains from a vacation, oceans from a commercial, deserts from a movie, farmland from driving through the Midwest with his eyes half closed. Homer's unconscious mind assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever encountered, layering them on top of each other without regard for geographic logic. Because dreams don't follow geographic logic, dreams follow emotional logic. And Springfield feels like America because it's made from Homer's memory of America, scattered and incomplete and held together by longing rather than longitude. And if the principle and the pauper theory is true, if Springfield operates through collective denial and the systematic suppression of inconvenient truths, then the town's refusal to have a fixed location is the ultimate expression of that denial. You can't investigate a town you can't find. You can't bring federal charges against a nuclear power plant if the state it's located in keeps changing. You can't hold anyone accountable for anything if the jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. Springfield's geographic uncertainty isn't just a comedy device. It's a legal shield. A town with no fixed location has no fixed regulatory authority, no consistent EPA oversight, no permanent state attorney general to investigate its nuclear facility. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability. Landing means someone shows up with a map and a badge and starts asking questions about the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the billionaire who glows in the dark. In the episode Behind the Laughter, the show's 12th season mockumentary about the Simpson family, Springfield's location is finally revealed. Sort of. In the original broadcast, the family is said to be from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state entirely. The answer literally depends on which version of the episode you're watching. Even when Springfield has a definitive answer, that answer isn't definitive. It shifts. It mutates. It refuses to stay pinned down, just like everything else in this town. Springfield will never be located, not because the show can't decide, because the show decided long ago that Springfield is more useful as a mystery than as an answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. And a town that belongs to everyone is a town nobody can shut down. Section 10. The Floating Timeline. Why? Nobody in Springfield ages. This is the final mystery. The one that ties every single theory in this video together. The one that sits at the center of 36 seasons like a black hole, warping everything around it. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted in 1989. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8. She is still 8. Homer and Marge were roughly in their mid-30s. They still are. Maggie was 1 year old. She still is. 36 years have passed in the real world. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The characters exist in a permanent present tense, locked at the ages they were when the show began. Living through decades of cultural change, cell phones and the internet and social media and streaming, and every technological and political revolution of the last 3.5 decades, without adding a single candle to their birthday cakes. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. It means the show's present is always the viewer's present. When an episode airs in 2025, the characters are living in 2025. When it aired in 1995, they were living in 1995. The year changes, the technology updates, the cultural references shift, but the characters remain frozen at the exact same ages forever. Most people accept this as a convention of the medium. That's just how long-running animated shows work. The Simpsons has been running long enough, though, that the floating timeline has created contradictions so massive that they've started to crack the foundation of the show's reality. The most obvious problem is the backstory. When the show began, Homer and Marge's history was grounded in the late 1970s and early 1980s. They met in high school. They fell in love. They had Bart. Their courtship was set during a specific era, complete with era-appropriate music and fashion and cultural reference points. Homer's hair, Marge's prom dress, The whole thing was anchored to a time period that made sense for parents in their mid-30s during the late 1980s. But as the floating timeline dragged the present forward, the backstory had to move with it. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they didn't meet in 1980. They met around 2005, which means their high school experience wasn't defined by Watergate and disco. It was defined by MySpace and early YouTube, and whatever pop culture was dominant in the mid-2000s. The show has depicted this shift explicitly. In later flashback episodes, Homer and Marge's youth has been rewritten to include references to the 1990s, then the 2000s, then the 2010s. Their origin story has been told and retold at least 4 distinct times, each version placing their formative years in a different decade. They were hippies, then they were grunge fans, then they were hipsters. The characters remain the same. The love story remains the same. But the era keeps sliding forward because the timeline demands it. This means Homer and Marge don't have a fixed past. Their history is rewritten every few years to maintain the illusion of a permanent present. Their memories are unstable. Their origin story is a draft that keeps getting revised. And within the logic of the show, this is simply how it works. Characters don't have histories, they have approximations, they have whatever backstory is needed to make the current episode work, and when the next episode needs a different backstory, the old one gets discarded. Now apply the theories. Every single theory we've explored converges on this point. Every one of them arrives at the same conclusion through a different path. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of an unconscious man who went under in 1993 and never came back. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their biology has been mutated by decades of nuclear contamination at the cellular level. The principal and the pauper theory says nobody ages because Springfield collectively agrees to ignore any truth that threatens the status quo, including the truth of time passing, including the truth of growing older, including the truth that 36 years have gone by and everyone in this town should look completely different. The Burns immortality theory says at least one person in Springfield has found a way to cheat death through technology and wealth, which means the concept of aging is already negotiable in this universe, already subject to override by sufficient resources and sufficient determination. And the prediction theory says The Simpsons exists in a feedback loop with American culture where the show and reality have become so deeply entangled that the distinction between what's happening in Springfield and what's happening in America has become meaningless. All of these theories are saying the same thing in different languages. Time doesn't work in Springfield. Not because Springfield is a cartoon. Because something about Springfield, whether it's the radiation or the coma or the collective denial or the billionaire's medical technology or some combination of all four simultaneously, has broken the normal flow of time for everyone inside it. The floating timeline isn't a production convenience. It's a symptom. It's the show telling you that these characters are trapped, locked in a loop, endlessly cycling through variations of the same lives, without ever progressing, without ever growing, without ever reaching the conclusion that time should eventually deliver to every living thing. The show has imagined its characters aging. It's done it multiple times. In the Season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding, the show flashes forward to show Lisa as a 23-year-old woman engaged to be married. The future it depicts is detailed and emotionally rich. Lisa has grown up. She's become the person the show has always suggested she would become: intelligent, principled, lonely in the way very smart people are lonely, searching for connection in a world that doesn't quite understand her. The episode proves that The Simpsons can imagine its characters as adults. It can envision their futures. It can tell stories about who they'd be if time were allowed to pass. But it chooses not to. The flash forward is a single episode, a what if, a glimpse through a window that closes immediately. Lisa returns to 8 years old, Bart returns to 10. The future is locked away. The permanent present resumes. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. And this is where the mystery becomes something larger than The Simpsons. Because the floating timeline is not just a narrative device. It's a statement about America. The Simpsons is the American family. They have been the American family for longer than any other fictional household in the history of the medium. And the American family, as The Simpsons depicts it, cannot be allowed to change. Homer must always be middle-aged. Marge must always be patient. Bart must always be rebellious. Lisa must always be idealistic. Maggie must always be silent. The dynamic must be preserved. The structure must hold. Because the moment the Simpson family ages, the moment Bart goes to college, and Lisa moves away, and Maggie starts talking, and Homer retires, and Marge is left alone in an empty house on Evergreen Terrace, the show isn't a comedy anymore. It's an elegy. It's the story of a family that ran out of time. And America doesn't want that story. America wants the version where the kids are always young and the parents are always together and the house always looks the same and the beer is always cold and the couch gag always plays and nobody ever has to say goodbye. The floating timeline is the show's thesis statement. The Simpsons are frozen because we need them to be, because they represent something we cannot afford to let go of. The messy, chaotic, dysfunctional, loving, infuriating, indestructible American family. The family that survives everything, that recovers from everything, that resets after every disaster and starts fresh every Sunday night at 8 o'clock. The family that was there when we were children and is still there now and will, as far as we can tell, be there when we're old. The Simpsons don't age because aging means ending, and the American family is not allowed to end. Not in television, not in our imagination, not in the dream of a comatose man in a hospital bed in a town that doesn't appear on any map. The loop isn't their prison, it's ours. We built it. We maintain it. We tune in every week to make sure the walls are still standing, and the family is still intact, and the timeline is still floating. And every time we watch, every time we laugh, every time we quote a line from an episode that aired before most of us were born, we tighten the loop a little more. We make it a little harder for the Simpsons to escape. Because if they escape, if the timeline stops floating and starts landing, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9 and Maggie finally says her second word, then the show ends. And the show ending means admitting that the version of America it represents was always temporary, always fragile, always one birthday away from dissolving into something we don't recognize anymore. The Simpsons are trapped in the loop because we trapped them. We pressed pause in 1989, and we never pressed play. And now here we are, 36 years later, watching the same family, in the same house, on the same street, in the same impossible town. Waiting for something to change, knowing nothing will, because we won't let it. Section 11. Hans Moleman, the most frequently killed character in animation history. If you've watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know Hans Moleman. He's the tiny, elderly, nearly blind man who appears in the background of Springfield scenes and exists primarily to suffer. He gets hit by cars. He gets crushed by falling objects. He gets buried alive. He gets eaten by animals. He gets struck by lightning. He gets incinerated. He walks into traffic and disappears under wheels. He falls into open manholes. He is, by conservative estimate, the most frequently killed character in the history of American animation. The show has killed Hans Moleman dozens of times. Not in Treehouse of Horror episodes, not in dream sequences, in regular, canonical episodes of The Simpsons. And then he appears in the next episode completely fine, no explanation, no resurrection scene, no acknowledgement that he was dead 2 episodes ago. He just shows up again, ready to be killed again, in an endless cycle of death and return that the show treats as background noise. Most fans accept this as a running gag. Moleman dies a lot. It's funny, don't think about it. But under the framework of the theories we've been discussing, Moleman's repeated deaths are deeply strange. If the radiation theory is true, Moleman could represent the most extreme mutation in Springfield, a man whose biology has been so fundamentally altered by nuclear exposure that his body can reconstitute itself after fatal trauma. He doesn't survive his deaths the way Homer survives injuries. Homer endures damage and heals. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases to function, and then he comes back. As if death in Springfield is, for certain residents, a temporary condition. A biological reset triggered by whatever the power plant has done to their cellular structure at a molecular level. If the coma theory is true, Moleman's repeated deaths serve a different function. He's a background process in Homer's dream, a filler character that Homer's unconscious mind doesn't care enough about to maintain consistently. Moleman dies because Homer's dreaming brain occasionally lets minor characters lapse. They fall out of the simulation, briefly, because maintaining the full cast of Springfield requires cognitive resources. Homer's deteriorating brain can only partially sustain, and he comes back because the dream needs him to populate the next scene. Moleman isn't a person in this reading. He's a prop. A piece of furniture that Homer's mind occasionally breaks and then reassembles, because the simulation requires a certain number of bodies to make Springfield feel like a real place. If the collective denial theory is true, Molman's deaths are just another thing Springfield has agreed not to notice. A man dies in public, repeatedly, visibly, in front of witnesses, and nobody investigates. Nobody calls for answers. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. The town has normalized Molman's death cycle the same way it normalized everything else that should be alarming. Three-eyed fish, a billionaire who glows in the dark, a baby who shot a man, a principal who isn't who he says he is, and a tiny old man who dies every few weeks and keeps showing up for more. But here's the detail that makes Molman genuinely disturbing. Molman once stated his age as 31 years old. 31. Look at him. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s. He is stooped, nearly blind, barely able to walk without assistance. His voice is the voice of a man who has been old for longer than most people are young. If he is telling the truth and there's no established reason within the show to believe he's lying about his own age, then something aged him catastrophically. Something took a man in the prime of his life and turned him into a walking corpse decades before his time. Something that also made him nearly indestructible despite his apparent frailty. Something that made death a revolving door rather than a permanent exit. Something that warped his biology in ways that defy normal human aging while simultaneously making him the most frequently killed background character in the history of the medium. The radiation theory has an answer for this. The coma theory has an answer for this. The collective denial theory has an answer for this. The only theory that doesn't have an answer is the one that says The Simpsons is just a cartoon and none of it means anything. Section 12. Ned Flanders, the saddest person in Springfield. Let's talk about the character the show has quietly destroyed more thoroughly than any other. The darkness hiding behind his relentless positivity is one of the most unsettling subtexts in the entire series. On the surface, Ned Flanders is everything Homer Simpson is not. He's kind, he's generous, he's devoutly religious, he's physically fit, he's financially responsible, he's a good father, he's a good neighbor. He is, by any objective measure, a better person than Homer in every conceivable way. More disciplined, more thoughtful, more consistent, more genuinely decent in his moment-to-moment behavior toward the people around him. And the show punishes him for it, relentlessly, without mercy, for 36 consecutive years. Ned's wife Maud was killed in a freak accident at the Springfield Speedway when a t-shirt cannon misfired and knocked her off the bleachers. She died because Homer was dodging the shirts being fired into the crowd, and they hit Maud instead. Homer's selfishness, his reflexive self-preservation, at the expense of anyone around him, literally killed Ned's wife. And Ned forgave him, because that's what Ned does. He forgives. He turns the other cheek. He absorbs punishment after punishment after punishment and responds with grace and patience and an unwavering faith that God has a plan, that there is a reason, that goodness will eventually be recognized even if it hasn't been yet. But fans noticed something wrong with the facade a long time ago. In the episode where a hurricane destroys Ned's house and the community rebuilds it so poorly that it immediately collapses, Ned snaps. He has a complete psychological breakdown right there in the street. He screams at the town. He insults every person who has ever wronged him. He says things he has been holding inside for decades, and then he is institutionalized, committed to a mental health facility, where it is revealed in a moment the show treats as comedic resolution, but that is actually one of its most disturbing reveals, that Ned's relentless niceness is not natural. It's the product of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His parents, being beatnik intellectuals who didn't believe in discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through what amounted to behavioral reprogramming. The doctor beat the rage out of Ned through therapy. 8 months of intensive conditioning. And it worked. Ned came out the other end mild-mannered, patient, deferential, incapable of sustained anger regardless of how much the situation warranted it. Ned's kindness isn't a character trait. It's a psychological cage built around a feral child by a doctor who intervened before Ned was old enough to consent. Everything about Ned's life reads differently once you understand this. His patience with Homer isn't saintly. It's pathological. He literally cannot express sustained anger. His brain was wired to suppress it at all costs. And 30-odd years later, the wiring holds even when it shouldn't. His faith isn't spiritual conviction. It's a coping mechanism for a man who needs an external framework to explain why he keeps suffering despite doing everything right. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death isn't an act of grace. It's the programmed response of a man who was conditioned as a child to never, under any circumstances, allow himself to feel the rage that lives at his core. And the show knows this. The show has shown us what happens when the conditioning fails. When Ned snaps, the person underneath is not violent, but he is something almost worse. He is bottomlessly, comprehensively despairing. The breakdown scene isn't funny when you understand what you're watching. You're watching a man whose entire psychological architecture, installed by a well-meaning but profoundly misguided doctor when he was a child, finally buckle under the accumulated weight of a life that has tested it past its design limits. The darkest interpretation of Ned Flanders is simple. He is the saddest character on the show. Not Homer, who is too cognitively impaired to fully comprehend the shape of his own suffering. Not Lisa, who is young enough to still believe that things might eventually improve. Not Burns, who is too powerful and too insulated by wealth to ever face meaningful consequences. Ned Flanders, the man who does everything right and gets nothing back. The man whose wife was killed by his neighbor's selfishness, who responded with forgiveness because his brain won't let him respond any other way. The man who goes to church every single Sunday and prays to a God who, within the show's own established continuity, exists and has spoken to Homer Simpson multiple times face-to-face, directly, offering jokes and advice and theological perspective, but has never once spoken to Ned. God talks to Homer. God ignores Ned. The drunk who falls asleep in church gets divine conversation. The devout man who has dedicated his entire life to faith gets silence. That is not random cruelty. That is a thesis statement. The Simpsons is telling you in the clearest possible terms that goodness is not rewarded in Springfield, that kindness is not protected, that faith is not answered, that the system, whether it's Burns's empire or the radiation or the floating timeline or all of it together, doesn't care about moral behavior. It cares about compliance. And Ned is the most compliant man in town. He was programmed to be compliant before he was old enough to choose, and his reward is a dead wife, a destroyed house, a neighbor who will never appreciate him regardless of what he does, and a God who talks to everyone except the one person who's actually listening. Ned Flanders is what happens when you do everything right in a system that doesn't reward rightness. Homer Simpson is what happens when you do everything wrong in a system that doesn't punish wrongness. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. And the gap between them, the gap between the man who tries and the man who doesn't, has never once closed. Because in Springfield, the gap doesn't close. The system isn't designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer at the power plant, and Ned at the church, and Burns at the top, and Molman in the ground, and everyone exactly where they are forever, in a loop that never breaks, in a town that never changes, in a show that never ends. Section 13. The Treehouse of Horror. What the show reveals when it thinks the rules don't apply. Every October, The Simpsons does something unusual. It takes off the gloves. The Treehouse of Horror anthology episodes running since Season 2, now spanning over 30 installments, are framed as non-canonical horror and comedy shorts, explicitly excluded from the show's continuity. The characters die. They kill each other. They encounter monsters and aliens and supernatural forces. And because none of it counts, because the show has established that these episodes exist outside the normal rules, the writers can do things they would never do in a regular episode. But here's what nobody talks about. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are where the show's deepest anxieties live. The regular episodes flirt with darkness. They hint at it. They gesture toward it before pulling back to the couch gag reset. The Treehouse episodes don't pull back. And what they reveal when they stop pulling back is a Springfield that is even more disturbing than the radiation theory or the coma theory suggests, because the horror elements in these specials aren't parodies of scary movies. They're the show's subconscious fears, rendered literally instead of metaphorically. Consider what the Treehouse episodes keep returning to: Homer's violence. In the regular episodes, Homer's strangling of Bart is a running gag, a comedic shorthand for frustration that the show has used for decades. In the Treehouse episodes, Homer's violence is expanded, literalized, given real weight. He becomes a murderer, a monster, a creature driven by appetite and impulse with no capacity for restraint. In the regular episodes, the show keeps Homer's violence safely contained within comedic framing. In the Treehouse specials, it lets the violence out. And what comes out is darker than the regular episodes could ever acknowledge: the loss of control. Season after season, the Treehouse stories return to scenarios where human agency collapses, where machines take over, where systems designed to serve humanity turn against it, where the orderly surface of suburban life is punctured by something inhuman underneath. This isn't arbitrary horror movie pastiche. This is the show processing its own central anxiety that everything in Springfield that looks normal is covering something monstrous, and that the monstrous thing is always one unexpected moment away from breaking through. The Shining. The show's parody of The Shining is one of the most celebrated Treehouse segments in the show's history. Homer is cut off from television and beer. He begins to go insane. He tries to kill his family. The joke is that Homer's sanity depends entirely on access to mindless distraction and alcohol. But under the radiation theory, the joke has a different edge. Homer's cognitive baseline is already so compromised that removing his coping mechanisms doesn't just make him irritable, it makes him dangerous. The Shining isn't just a parody of Kubrick. It's the show's most honest depiction of what Homer Simpson might actually be capable of in the absence of the distractions that keep him manageable. The Homer Cubed segment, where Homer discovers a three-dimensional world hidden behind the bookcase and gets trapped in it, is another one. On the surface, it's a sophisticated visual joke about CGI and geometry. Underneath, it's about a man who stumbles into a version of reality that operates on different rules and is unable to find his way back. That's the coma theory rendered as a visual gag. Homer, in a world that doesn't quite make sense, cut off from his family, trying to find his way home, discovering that the home he's looking for might not exist in the form he remembers. The Treehouse episodes are the show's unconscious. They're what The Simpsons would be if it stopped pretending that everything is basically fine. And the fact that they've been running annually for over 30 years, that the show needs this annual release valve, this designated space where the darkness can come out, suggests that the darkness has always been there, pressing against the surface, waiting for October to be allowed out. Section 14. Burns and the Workers, a labor horror story. Let's step back from the supernatural and the theoretical for a moment and look at what the Burns-Homer employment relationship is, stripped of the comedy framing. Homer Simpson works in conditions that would be illegal in any jurisdiction with functioning regulatory oversight. He works in a facility with 342 documented safety violations. He works in proximity to an active nuclear reactor without consistent protective equipment. He sleeps at his post. He is routinely exposed to radioactive materials in quantities and concentrations that no occupational safety standard would permit. And he has been doing this without meaningful complaint for his entire adult life. In exchange for this, Burns pays Homer a salary that the show has periodically described as barely adequate. Homer can afford a house, a nice house, actually, by the standards of a working-class family, but money is always tight. There's never enough for the things he wants. There's always enough for survival, but never quite enough for comfort. He is, in the language of labor economics, precisely compensated to the level that ensures his continued availability without giving him enough security to feel capable of walking away. This is not accidental. This is strategy. Burns understands labor dynamics the way Burns understands everything, with absolute, unsentimental clarity. He has been managing workers for over a century. He has watched labor movements rise and get crushed. He understands exactly what a worker needs to be kept in place. Just enough to survive, just enough to fear losing, and a level of cognitive impairment deep enough that the worker cannot articulate what's being done to them. Homer provides the cognitive impairment. The radiation provides the rest. And the deal with Grandpa provides the legal foundation that ensures Homer can never be fired no matter how egregiously he fails. Which means Homer has just enough job security to stay without having enough to feel truly secure. The show has, across its run, depicted Burns engaging in labor practices that range from appalling to criminal. He has used the threat of unemployment to coerce workers into illegal activities. He has created company towns situations where Burns controls not just the employment but the housing, the commerce, and the social infrastructure of his workers' lives. He has deployed private security against striking workers. He has manipulated local government to ensure that no regulatory body with teeth can operate in Springfield. And the workers, by and large, stay. They stay because the plant is the primary employer in Springfield. They stay because there is no meaningful alternative. They stay because 36 years of contaminated water and irradiated air has damaged their ability to organize, to reason collectively, to sustain the kind of long-term planning that labor action requires. The radiation theory and the labor exploitation story are the same story. Burns doesn't just poison his workers because he's indifferent to their well-being. Burns poisons his workers because it makes them easier to control. A population with compromised cognition cannot effectively organize. A community whose collective memory resets after every catastrophe cannot build the institutional knowledge that labor movements require. And a man who has been cognitively impaired since childhood, who is desperate for approval and terrified of abandonment, who would rather strangle his son in frustration than confront his employer in anger that man will work in a nuclear plant for 36 years and never once file a meaningful complaint. Homer is not an accident. Homer is the product of a system that was specifically designed to produce Homer. Dependent, compliant, just competent enough to keep the reactors from melting down immediately, and too damaged to ever understand what's happening to him. Burns isn't just a villain. He's a case study in how concentrated power maintains itself. He doesn't need to be cruel every day. He just needs to ensure that the conditions of exploitation are so thoroughly normalized that the workers inside them cannot conceive of any alternative. Springfield doesn't notice what Burns is doing because Burns has ensured that Springfield cannot notice. The radiation that poisons the body also poisons the mind. The mind that cannot think critically cannot challenge the source of its own poisoning. And the source of the poisoning sitting at the top of the hill in its mansion, watching the town below through ancient eyes, doesn't need to worry. It never needed to worry, not once in over a century. Section 15. Lisa's Burden. The cost of being right in Springfield. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. She has an IQ that the show has placed in the genius range across multiple episodes. She plays the saxophone with genuine skill. She is a committed environmentalist, an animal rights advocate, a Buddhist, a feminist, and a vegetarian. She is, in almost every measurable way, the most morally serious character in The Simpsons. And she is, without question, the most consistently unhappy. The show depicts Lisa's intelligence as both her defining characteristic and her fundamental curse. She sees things that other people in Springfield cannot or will not see. She makes connections that others miss. She asks questions that others have agreed not to ask. And the community's response to her intelligence is not gratitude or recognition. It's dismissal. It's mockery. It's the specific, low-grade cruelty that mediocre environments reserve for people who remind them of their own limitations. Lisa's arc, to the extent that a character in a floating timeline can be said to have an arc, is the story of someone who keeps trying to make things better in an environment specifically designed to resist. Improvement. She files the environmental reports. She starts the petitions. She researches the issues. She presents the evidence. And the community, over and over in episode after episode, looks at the evidence and chooses the comfortable lie. This is why the radiation theory, if true, is most tragic when you look at it through Lisa's eyes. Lisa can see what's wrong. She can feel it. She knows something is off about Springfield, about the yellow skin, about the way nobody ages, about the fish with 3 eyes, about the power plant that looms over everything. She is the only member of her family with the intelligence to perceive the pattern. But she is also the only member of her family who is exposed to Springfield's contamination from birth, which means the same poison that she can almost see is also working on her. Even Lisa's brilliant mind is operating within the constraints of an environment designed to make clear thinking impossible, and this is the cruelest thing the radiation theory does to Lisa specifically. She is smart enough to see that something is wrong. She is not quite smart enough or not sufficiently protected from the contamination to put all the pieces together into a complete picture. She's smart enough to be miserable. She's not smart enough to get out. The show has imagined Lisa's future in multiple flash-forward episodes, and the pattern is consistent. Lisa grows up to be exactly who she appears to be at 8 years old: principled, brilliant, committed, and alone. The intelligence that makes her exceptional also makes connection difficult. The standards that make her admirable make her uncompromising in ways that push people away. The Springfield she grows up in, whether in the future episodes or in the permanent present of the regular series, never becomes the Springfield she wants it to be. Lisa keeps trying anyway. Episode after episode, decade after decade, she keeps trying. She plays the saxophone alone in her room. She writes her essays that nobody will read. She files the reports that nobody will act on. She asks the questions that nobody wants to answer. In a show about a town that chooses comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths, Lisa Simpson is the one character who has never made that choice. She is the one character who keeps looking, keeps asking, keeps refusing to accept the official version of reality as a substitute for the actual one. And the town's reward for this is to ignore her. Consistently. Comprehensively. Generation after generation. Lisa's intelligence isn't a superpower in Springfield. It's a chronic condition. A source of pain that she has never learned to treat because the only treatment available to her is the one she refuses. Stop looking, stop asking, accept the lie, join the loop, and she won't. Which means she will be 8 years old forever, the smartest person in a town that doesn't want her, playing the saxophone alone, waiting for someone to finally hear what she's been trying to say. Section 16. Bart Simpson the Rebel, without a cause to rebel against. Here's the thing about Bart Simpson that the show has never quite said out loud. His rebellion is the only rational response to Springfield. Bart is the kid who doesn't follow the rules. He doesn't do his homework. He doesn't respect authority. He disrupts class. He pranks teachers. He ignores the social contract that Springfield is built on, the unspoken agreement to pretend that everything is normal, to not ask questions, to not look too hard at the things that don't add up. Bart ignores all of it and does exactly what he wants. The show frames this as a character flaw. Bart needs to grow up. Bart needs to take responsibility. Bart needs to start playing by the rules. These are the lessons that dozens of episodes try to teach him, and they never stick because by the next episode, Bart is back to being Bart. But consider what the rules of Springfield actually are. The rules of Springfield say, don't question the power plant. Don't ask why the fish have 3 eyes. Don't remember what happened last week. Don't notice that your neighbor is 100 years old and glowing green. Don't look at the skeletons in the basement. Don't find out where the radiation is going. Trust the official story. Vote to maintain the lie. And anyone who breaks these rules, anyone who insists on the truth, who demands accountability, who refuses to let the catastrophe be forgotten, gets expelled from the community. Bart isn't rebelling against healthy social structures. He's rebelling against a contamination zone that has agreed, collectively, to pretend it's a normal town. His instinct that the rules are wrong, that authority shouldn't be trusted by default, that the official story deserves scrutiny, is the correct instinct. In a town built on enforced amnesia and collective denial, the kid who refuses to play along is the sane one. The tragedy of Bart is that his rebellion is real but undirected. He knows something is wrong. He feels it in the same way Lisa knows something is wrong, but where Lisa channels that knowledge into principled inquiry, Bart channels it into disruption. He doesn't know what he's pushing against. He just knows he needs to push. And the pushing looks like pranks and rule-breaking and dismissal of authority, rather than the coordinated, evidence-based challenge to Burns's empire that Springfield actually needs. Bart is the fight in search of the right target, the energy without the direction, the resistance without the analysis. And in the coma theory, Bart takes on a different significance entirely. If Homer is dreaming, Bart is what Homer needs him to be, the child who is always 10, always mischievous, always there to be strangled and forgiven and strangled again. The relationship between Homer and Bart, the endless cycle of frustration and reconciliation, the pranks and the punishments, the strangling and the making up, is the most honest emotional loop in the show. Homer and Bart drive each other crazy because they are the same person at different stages of damage. Homer is what Bart would become if Springfield gets to him completely. Bart is what Homer was before it did. In the coma, Homer keeps Bart exactly as he remembers him. Young enough to still be saved, old enough to be interesting, rebellious enough to be exhausting, loving enough, underneath all of it, to be worth dreaming about. That's the relationship that has sustained the show for 36 years. Not Homer and Marge's marriage, as central as that is. Not Homer and Burns' power dynamic, as structurally important as that is. Homer and Bart, the father who doesn't know how to be one, and the son who doesn't know how to not need him, is the emotional core of everything The Simpsons has ever done. And in the loop, they get to keep doing it forever. The strangling never permanently damages anything. The apologies always come. The love underneath the frustration is always there. Because in the dream, the worst that can happen between a father and a son is that the son pulls a prank and the father chases him around the house. That is not the worst thing that can happen between a father and a son. Homer knows this. And in the dream, he makes sure it never has to be. Section 17. The secondary characters Springfield as an ecosystem. Springfield has one of the most densely populated supporting casts in the history of American television. Not just in terms of number of characters, though the number is staggering. A community that has expanded over 36 seasons to encompass hundreds of named, recurring personalities, but in terms of depth. The best secondary characters in The Simpsons aren't just punchline delivery systems. They're complete worlds, each one carrying an entire history that the show only ever glimpses. Sideshow Bob, Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., the Yale-educated, Gilbert and Sullivan obsessed, Bart Simpson obsessed former sideshow performer turned serial killer, turned legitimate politician turned serial would-be murderer, is one of the most sophisticated character studies in animated television. Bob is what happens when high intelligence and genuine talent are combined with a colossal ego, a fundamental incapacity for perspective, and a target for obsession so unworthy of the obsession that the obsession itself becomes the defining tragedy of his life. Bob is a genius who has devoted his genius to trying to kill a 10-year-old boy. And he keeps failing. Every elaborate scheme, every meticulously planned revenge, every perfectly constructed trap, Bart escapes them all, usually through some combination of luck, intuition, and the specific kind of practical intelligence that Bob's classical education has completely failed to prepare him for. Bob can recite Verdi and parse Shakespeare and construct plans of genuine sophistication. He cannot, apparently, kill Bart Simpson. This has been going on for 36 years. And under the coma theory, it makes a kind of perfect sense. Homer's unconscious mind, in constructing Bart's story, needed a worthy adversary, someone who would pose a real threat, who would return again and again, who would be genuinely dangerous rather than cartoonishly harmless. So Homer's brain produced Bob, brilliant, implacable, absolutely committed to Bart's destruction, and constitutionally incapable of actually achieving it. Because in the dream, Bart cannot die. Homer will not allow it. And so Bob exists as the threat that is never quite realized, the danger that always falls just short, the predator who can never quite catch the prey, not because the prey is faster, but because the dream won't permit the ending Bob is working toward. Krusty the Clown is another one. Herschel Schmoikel, Pinchas Yerucham Krustovsky, a man whose professional identity as Springfield's beloved children's entertainer is the complete inversion of everything he actually is. Krusty smokes. Krusty drinks. Krusty gambles. Krusty has been bankrupt multiple times, married multiple times, involved in criminal activities ranging from tax evasion to medical fraud. He is a fundamentally broken man who has built his entire public life on performing a character, the joyful, wisecracking clown that he finds nauseating. And the children of Springfield adore him. Bart, specifically, worships Krusty with a devotion that the show depicts as essentially religious. Krusty is Bart's hero, the person Bart wants to be, the embodiment of everything Bart values: irreverence, humor, refusal to take anything seriously. Which is to say, Bart's hero is a hollow shell of a man whose public persona is a carefully maintained lie deployed to sell merchandise to children. The show understands the irony. It has always understood the irony. Krusty's whole arc is the arc of a man who cannot tell the difference between performing happiness and experiencing it, who has spent so long doing the clown that he has forgotten, somewhere along the way, whether there was ever anyone underneath. Krusty is the show's meditation on entertainment itself, on what it costs to be funny for a living, on the relationship between performance and identity, on what happens to a person who makes children laugh for decades while his own capacity for joy quietly evaporates. And he keeps showing up, episode after episode, decade after decade, the same man in the same makeup, doing the same show for a generation of children who will grow up and remember him fondly while he's somewhere behind the red nose and the oversized shoes, wonders what exactly he has been doing with his life. Chief Wiggum, Ralph's father, the least competent police chief in the history of fictional law enforcement. A man whose incompetence has been specifically constructed, the show implies, to ensure that certain crimes in Springfield are never investigated, certain violations are never documented, and certain powerful people are never held accountable for their actions. Wiggum's stupidity is not incidental, it's structural. In a town where the primary employer is also the primary source of illegal activity, you need a police department whose fundamental inadequacy is not a bug but a feature. Wiggum cannot find evidence that isn't essentially left directly in his hands. He cannot follow an investigation that requires more than 2 steps. He cannot sustain professional attention on anything that someone with resources wants ignored. He is, in short, the perfect shield for Burns. Not because Burns controls Wiggum directly, though there is evidence across multiple episodes that Burns's influence extends into the police department, but because Wiggum's comprehensive incompetence provides plausible deniability. Nobody needs to be paid off when the investigator is incapable of investigating. Springfield's secondary characters, taken together, are not just supporting cast. They're an ecosystem. Every one of them has been placed in their role socially, professionally, economically in ways that serve the system Burns built. The corrupt cops, the compliant doctors, the incompetent safety inspector, the brilliant but isolated 8-year-old who sees through it all and is systematically ignored, the devout neighbor who has been conditioned to forgive, the rebellious 10-year-old whose rebellion has no direction, the ancient billionaire who needs all of these pieces exactly where they are, doing exactly what they're doing forever. Springfield isn't just a town, it's an engine, designed to run on exploitation and collective denial, and just enough comfort to keep the residents from ever asking why they're uncomfortable. And every character in it, down to the ones who appear for a single scene and are never seen again, is a working part. Section 18. The Simpsons and American Class. What the show was always really about. The Simpsons premiered in 1989. The United States was 8 years into the Reagan Revolution. Unions were being busted. Manufacturing was beginning to migrate overseas. The gap between the wealthy and everyone else was widening in ways that wouldn't become undeniable for another decade. And into this landscape, Matt Groening dropped a show about a working-class family, a man who works in a nuclear plant, a woman who stays home, 3 kids in public school, and made it the most-watched program in the country. This is not a coincidence. The Simpsons was, at its core, a class satire. Homer Simpson isn't just a character. He's a social type, the unskilled male laborer, the product of a public education system that asked little and received little, the person who ends up in whatever job was available when he needed a job and stays there because the alternative is worse. His blue-collar status isn't incidental background detail. It's the entire foundation of the show's comedy and the entire source of its pathos. Homer has a job that most of America has had, or knows someone who has had, or understands instinctively the job you didn't choose, in the building you'd rather not be in, for the boss who doesn't know your name. The show's early seasons are so good precisely because they understood this. The financial stress felt real. The desperation felt real. The constant gap between what Homer wanted for his family and what he could actually provide the birthday cakes bought the day before they were needed, because he'd forgotten until then, the vacations to places he couldn't actually afford, the Christmas with no presents until the last-minute miracle, all of it had the texture of actual experience. And then, as the coma theory would predict, the texture changed. Homer's financial situation became simultaneously more precarious and less real. He continued to hold a job that, in any version of reality, would pay a reasonable working-class salary, yet money crises appeared and disappeared without logic. Luxury appeared without explanation. The economics of the Simpson household became a floating set of conditions that served whatever a given episode required. Because the later seasons weren't really about class anymore. They were about entertainment. They were about celebrity and adventure and the increasingly spectacular premise. The social satire that made the early seasons sting got replaced by the softer comedy of excess Homer doing increasingly improbable things in increasingly improbable circumstances. The class critique getting further from its roots with every new season. But the class critique never disappeared entirely. It's there in Burns. It's there in the way Burns treats Homer. It's there in the deal Burns made with Grandpa, the way he bought a man's silence with a promise of employment for that man's son, as if Homer's entire labor value could be traded like a commodity between powerful men, while Homer himself had no say in the transaction. The Simpsons was never really about The Simpsons. It was about the relationship between people like The Simpsons and people like Burns. About what concentrated power does to the people who live in its shadow. About how exploitation is sustained not through obvious cruelty but through normalized conditions, through the gradual, patient transformation of unacceptable circumstances into the furniture of everyday life. Homer doesn't fight Burns because Homer has been made into someone who cannot fight Burns. Not through malice in any given moment, but through the accumulated effects of poverty, radiation, cognitive damage, maternal abandonment, paternal silence, and 36 years of just enough money, just enough comfort, just enough distraction to keep him from noticing what's being taken from him. That is the show's deepest subject. That has always been the show's deepest subject. And the fact that it's embedded in a cartoon about a yellow family in an impossible town has made it more durable, not less. Because you can dismiss the satire as just a cartoon. You can laugh at Homer strangling Bart and go to bed. You can watch the Treehouse of Horror and enjoy the horror, and not think too hard about what the horror represents. But the subject is still there, underneath the couch gags and the celebrity cameos and the increasingly surreal plot premises. The question that every episode of The Simpsons has always been asking, even when it wasn't asking it directly, what happens to the people that the system is designed to leave behind? The answer is Homer Simpson. Homer is what happens. And Springfield is where it happens. And it has been happening for 36 years, and it shows no signs of stopping. Section 19. The Treehouse of Horror Continuity. When the non-canon reveals the canon, there's a specific detail about the Treehouse of Horror episodes that gets overlooked in most discussions of the specials. They are presented as non-canonical. The show is explicit about this. These things don't really happen. The deaths don't count. The horrors are outside the timeline. But across 30-plus installments, certain themes recur so consistently, certain anxieties appear so persistently, that they begin to feel less like random horror anthology content and more like the show's genuine, unfiltered relationship with its own central ideas. Consider the number of Treehouse segments that deal with Homer losing control of himself. The shinning, as mentioned. Homer is deprived of his usual anesthetics and becomes murderous. The same episode that makes this a Kubrick joke also makes it a statement about what Homer requires to remain a manageable presence in his own family. Remove the beer and the television and the donuts and the comfortable numbness of the everyday, and what's left is something dangerous. In another famous segment, Homer is attacked by a mysterious gremlin on the wing of a plane. The joke is that nobody believes him. The horror is that a man is being assaulted by something real, and his family is dismissing his terror as paranoia. This is, in its bones, the Homer coma story. A man experiencing something that nobody around him can perceive or validate, isolated inside his own perception, unable to prove what he knows is happening. In the Homega Man segment, Springfield is destroyed by nuclear war, and Homer is the only survivor. He wanders a post-apocalyptic wasteland alone, initially delighted by the freedom, before discovering that the other Springfield residents survived as mutants and are hunting him. The segment is a parody of the Omega Man, but underneath the parody, it's working through something specific. What would Springfield look like without the social contract? What would the radiation-mutated residents do if the pretense of normalcy was gone? The answer the segment offers is, they would form a mob and hunt the one person who wasn't mutated alongside them, normal and abnormal, inside and outside, the contaminated and the uncontaminated. The segment encodes, in horror comedy form, the central dynamic of the radiation theory. Springfield's mutated population is always, on some level, in tension with anything that isn't like them. The isolation of the uncontaminated is the logical extension of a community that has normalized contamination. The Treehouse episodes are, in this reading, the show's ID. They're what The Simpsons would be if it stopped managing the darkness, if the writers were allowed to take the central premises of the show to their actual conclusions, rather than pulling back to the safe comedy ending. They're the version of Springfield where the things that are merely implied in the regular episodes are depicted directly, without the cushion of the reset button. And the fact that these episodes have been running annually since 1990, that the show has needed this pressure valve, this annual space where the darkness can come out and be processed, tells you something important about the regular episodes. The darkness that the Treehouse episodes release was always there, building, accumulating, looking for an exit. The exit opens every October and then closes again, and the regular episodes resume and everything is fine and nobody aged and nobody remembers and the loop keeps going. But the darkness is still there. It never goes anywhere. It just waits for October. Section 20. What The Simpsons is really about: the final synthesis. Let's bring it all together. We've spent this entire video in Springfield. We've examined the radiation poisoning every resident. We've explored the possibility that Homer has been unconscious since April 1993. We've reopened the Burns shooting case and found that the official verdict doesn't survive scrutiny. We've traced Burns's impossible lifespan and understood it as a product of radical medical intervention and enormous wealth. We've watched an entire town vote to criminalize truth and exile the messenger. We've looked behind Maggie's silence and found something extraordinary. We've counted the predictions that came true and understood why the ones that didn't were forgotten. We've followed Mona Simpson's story from activism to exile and traced the damage through 3 generations. We've searched for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere and nowhere. We've stared at the floating timeline until we understood what it was really saying. We've looked at the secondary characters and seen them not as comic relief but as working parts of a system designed to sustain itself. Every theory in this video is different. Everyone uses different evidence, different logic, different assumptions about what The Simpsons is and what it's trying to say. The radiation theory is a story about environmental exploitation. The coma theory is a story about grief and love and the desperate human need to hold on to what we're losing. The Burns immortality theory is a story about the relationship between wealth and mortality, about how much death can be delayed if you have enough money. The principal and the pauper theory is a story about collective denial and the infrastructure of comfortable lies. The Maggie theory is a story about strategic invisibility. The Mona theory is a story about how far the ripples of one man's vindictiveness can travel. But every theory arrives at the same place. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental. Something structural. Something that goes deeper than animation style or episodic storytelling or cartoon logic. Whether it's radiation or dreams or denial or institutional corruption or the sheer weight of existing for 36 years without being allowed to change, something has broken the rules of reality in this town. And the show has been telling you about it since the very first episode, not through exposition, not through dramatic reveals, through accumulation, through repetition. Through the slow, patient layering of detail upon detail upon detail until the picture becomes undeniable. The Simpsons isn't hiding its mysteries. It's showing them to you every single week. It's just that nobody inside the show can see them because Springfield won't let them, and nobody in the audience can see them because we've been watching for so long that we've become Springfield. We've accepted the yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the ageless children, and the billionaire who won't die, and the town that won't change. We've normalized it. We've become the people who look at a 3-eyed fish and say, well, that's just how things are around here, but they don't have to be. The theories exist because some people looked at Springfield and refused to accept the surface. They dug. They connected. They asked the questions that the characters can't ask because the characters are trapped inside the loop. And what they found, what we've been exploring throughout this entire breakdown, is a version of Springfield that is stranger and sadder and more beautiful than the one the show presents at face value. A version where Homer's stupidity is a scar left by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to defend himself. Where Maggie's silence is the smartest thing anyone in the family has ever done. Where Burns's immortality is the logical conclusion of unchecked wealth meeting medical technology in the hands of a man with no ethical limits. Where Marge's patience is the foundation that keeps the whole fragile structure standing, not because she doesn't see what's happening, but because she has understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone, that the alternative to keeping this family together is too terrible to consider. where Bart's rebellion is the only sane response available to someone with his instincts and his limitations in a world that has stopped making sense. And where Lisa, 8 years old, brilliant, alone, playing the saxophone in her room, keeps asking questions that nobody wants to answer because she is the only person in Springfield who has never made the choice to stop looking. That's The Simpsons. 36 seasons, over 780 episodes, the longest-running animated series in the history of American television, the most analyzed, most theorized, most dissected show ever created, and after all of that, after all the theories and all the evidence and all the hours spent trying to crack the code, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can't we let them go? Maybe because they're us. Maybe because Springfield is our town, and Homer is our father, and Marge is our mother, and Bart is who we wanted to be, and Lisa is who we should have been, and Maggie is the version of ourselves we keep hidden behind a pacifier, watching everything, saying nothing, waiting for the right moment to finally speak. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe we can't let them go because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we're older now, that the world has changed in ways we didn't ask for and couldn't stop, that the couch we sat on as kids watching the opening credits is gone now, or in someone else's house, or in a landfill somewhere outside a town that might or might not be Springfield. And as long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Homer is stumbling through the door at 5:30 after another day at the plant, we don't have to admit any of that. We can sit down. We can turn on the television. And we can go home to Evergreen Terrace, to Springfield, to the family that never changes and the town that never ages and the show that never ends. The loop isn't their prison. It never was. It's ours. We built it. We maintain it. We need it. And every theory we construct about why Springfield is the way it is, every attempt to explain the three-eyed fish and the floating timeline and the billionaire who glows in the dark is really just another way of asking the same question underneath all the other questions. How do we hold on to the things we love without being destroyed by the holding? The Simpsons doesn't answer that question. It just keeps asking it. Every Sunday night, every couch gag, every strangling, every saxophone note from an 8-year-old girl who has been 8 years old for longer than most of her audience has been alive, that's the show. That has always been the show. 36 years of the same question, asked in 36 years of different ways, and the fact that we're still watching means we still don't have the answer, which means Springfield will be here next week, and the week after, and every week after that for as long as we need it to be. Which, if the last 36 years are any guide, is going to be a very long time. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. That's the whole point. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. If you got this far, you're one of us now. Drop a comment with your location and the time you're watching this. I want to know where in the world people are losing sleep over a cartoon that started airing before some of you were born. Subscribe if you haven't. And I'll see you in the next one. End of script. Total approximate word count to 40,000 words. Section 21. The hidden arc storylines the show introduced and never resolved. The Simpsons has a specific kind of narrative crime it commits regularly and never answers for. Not continuity errors, those are expected in a show that has been running for 36 seasons across hundreds of writers, dozens of showrunners, and multiple wholesale shifts in creative direction. Not the floating timeline contradictions. Those are structural, deliberate, baked in. The crime I'm talking about is something different. It's the narrative thread that the show introduces with apparent sincerity, develops with real emotional weight, and then drops completely without explanation. These aren't forgotten subplots. These are loaded guns the show put on the mantle and never fired. Let's start with the most obvious one. Homer's intelligence. The episode HOMR Season 12, Episode 9, is one of the most sophisticated pieces of television The Simpsons ever produced. Homer discovers that a crayon was lodged in his brain during childhood. He has the crayon removed. His IQ rises to above-average levels. He becomes, briefly, a genuinely intelligent person. He writes a scientific paper. He has complex conversations. He becomes friends with Lisa in a way that was never possible before because they finally have equal cognitive ground to stand on. And then he has the crayon put back in because being smart in Springfield was too painful. The intelligence made him see things he couldn't unsee. and what he saw was unbearable. The episode ends. Homer returns to his baseline. The crayon is back in, the IQ is back down. And the show never, not once, in the dozens of episodes that follow, acknowledges what happened. The fact that Homer knows, somewhere underneath the fog, that he was briefly smart, that he made a choice to return to stupidity, that this choice was made with enough cognitive sophistication to constitute genuine agency, none of it is ever revisited. Homer made the most consequential decision of his life in that episode. He chose who he would be forever, with full knowledge of the alternative. And then the show moved on and treated him as if the choice had never been made. Why? What does it mean that Homer knows what he gave up and continues to give it up every day without complaint? Is it possible that the person who chose the crayon who understood, with temporary clarity, exactly what he was choosing and why is still in there somewhere, aware and watching, and has decided that the watching is enough? That the comfortable numbness of the fog is worth the price of the clarity he's given up? The show never asks. It introduces this possibility that Homer is making a continuous, informed choice to be less than he could be, and then drops it completely, because following it to its conclusion would transform the show's comedy into something much darker and much more uncomfortable. Then there's the matter of Abe Simpson's secrets. Abe Simpson is, by any measure, one of the most interesting supporting characters in the show's history. He's Homer's father. He's a World War II veteran. He's a resident of the Springfield retirement castle. He's garrulous, distractible, prone to wandering off subject in the middle of sentences, seemingly lost in his own memories more than he's present in any given scene. And he is, across multiple episodes, revealed to be holding an extraordinary number of secrets. He covered up the truth of Mona's disappearance from Homer for 27 years. He struck a deal with Burns to secure Homer's employment in exchange for his silence about a crime Burns committed. He has a second family revealed in a late-season episode that Homer never knew about. A half-sibling Homer has apparently never met or met only briefly. He fought in the war alongside a unit whose activities weren't always admirable. He has referenced events and relationships in history that the show teases and then never develops. Abe is, beneath the comedic, doddering old man surface, a man who has been carrying enormous amounts of concealed information for decades. Information that would fundamentally change how Homer understands his own life. And Abe keeps this information hidden not out of cruelty, but out of a specific kind of cowardice. The cowardice of a man who made bad decisions and has never been able to face the consequences of honesty. The show keeps adding to Abe's secrets file and never empties it. There are things Abe knows about Homer's life that Homer will never know, because Abe will never tell him, and the show will never force the conversation. These secrets accumulate without resolution. They generate narrative weight without narrative payoff. They are the loaded guns on the mantle that the show keeps pointing at and then carefully declining to fire. The Flanders children, Rod and Todd Flanders, Ned's sons. They appear regularly as Bart's neighborhood counterparts, the kids he occasionally befriends and occasionally antagonizes, the children who represent everything Bart isn't, the junior Flanderses who have been raised with their father's values of courtesy and faith and restraint. And the show drops an occasional detail about them, about their unusually sheltered lives, about the ways Ned's behavioral conditioning has been applied to his parenting, about the specific kind of controlled environment he's created for them that suggests there's a richer story there than the show ever tells. What happens to kids raised in a Springfield household by a man whose own psychology was shaped by coercive conditioning? What happens to children growing up next door to the Simpsons in a contaminated town while their father refuses to acknowledge that anything is wrong? The show never asks. Rod and Todd exist primarily as background characters, occasional punchlines, and periodic reminders that Ned's household is very different from Homer's. But the difference has implications the show keeps refusing to develop. What does it mean to be a normal, uncontaminated child in a town that damages children? If the radiation theory is true, Rod and Todd are potentially the healthiest children in Springfield. Their father's obsessive health consciousness, his distance from the power plant, his insistence on clean living, may have inadvertently protected them from the worst of the contamination that affects the rest of the community. Are they smarter than they appear? Are they developing in ways the other Springfield children aren't? Does Ned know something he's not saying about what Springfield does to its residents? The show never develops any of this. Rod and Todd are props. The narrative potential they carry, genuine, interesting, thematically rich potential, goes unspent. This is a pattern that runs through the entire series. The Simpsons is extraordinarily good at establishing narrative possibilities and extraordinarily unwilling to follow them to their conclusions. It's a consequence of the floating timeline storylines that would require characters to change or grow or confront the consequences of their choices cannot be developed, because the characters cannot change and cannot grow and cannot face consequences that stick. The reset button erases everything, but the loaded guns remain. Season after season, the show puts things on the mantle and never fires them. Homer's informed choice of stupidity. Abe's accumulated secrets. The Flanders children's potential anomalousness. The questions Lisa keeps asking that nobody answers. The conspiracy that connects Burns to Mona, to Homer, to the power plant, to the deal with Grandpa. These are not loose ends. They are the shape of the show's real story, the one it cannot tell, because telling it would require the characters to live in time, to face consequences, to become different people than they were when the episode started. The Simpsons is a show full of stories it can never finish. And the specific stories it cannot finish are the most important ones. The ones about who these people really are underneath the comedy. The ones about what Springfield has done to them, and whether they could ever understand it. The ones that would require Homer to wake up from the coma and find out who he actually became while he was dreaming. Those stories are there. You can see them, outlined in what the show introduces and then drops. They live in the space between the loaded guns and the mantle. And they will never be fired as long as the show keeps running. Section 22. The economics of Springfield. How Burns controls everything through money. Burns owns the power plant. This is the foundational fact of Springfield's economy. Everything else flows from it. The power plant is the primary employer in Springfield. Not the most prominent. There are restaurants and shops and schools and hospitals and the various small businesses that populate the background of any given episode. But primary in the sense that the plant is where the economic weight of the community sits. It's the institution around which everything else in Springfield organizes itself. When the plant does well, Springfield does well. When the plant struggles, Springfield struggles. And since Burns controls the plant absolutely, Burns controls Springfield absolutely. This is an arrangement Burns has cultivated with extraordinary care over many decades. Consider the housing situation. The Simpsons live on Evergreen Terrace in a house that, by any reasonable calculation, based on Homer's apparent salary, they should not be able to afford. The house is a comfortable single-family home in a stable neighborhood. Homer's nuclear plant salary at a position he has held despite documented incompetence provides the foundation for a lifestyle that includes a car, a dog, 3 children in school, regular meals, and occasional vacations and luxuries. This is not an accident. Burns has calibrated the plant's compensation to keep his workforce housed, fed, and stable. Not comfortable. Homer is never quite comfortable, never quite free of financial anxiety, always just on the edge of being unable to afford something the family wants, but stable enough that the idea of leaving is frightening rather than appealing. The economics of Springfield are the economics of the company town, updated for the 20th and 21st century. Burns doesn't need to own the housing directly. He just needs to ensure that the wages he pays and the local economic activity those wages support are sufficient to keep the community dependent on his continued operation while never being sufficient to give anyone the financial security to take a real risk. Homer cannot quit because Homer cannot afford to quit. Not just financially, though, that's part of it, but psychologically. Homer's entire identity is bound up in being a provider, in being able to bring home the thing that keeps the family at 742 Evergreen Terrace instead of somewhere worse. The fear of that loss of failing as a provider, of letting Marge and the kids down, of being the man who couldn't even hold on to the one job he was given is more powerful than any other motivation Homer has. More powerful than his desire for better conditions. More powerful than his awareness, however dim, that his employer is poisoning him. Burns knows this. Burns has always known this. The man who understood radiation therapy well enough to extend his own life by decades certainly understands labor psychology well enough to design a compensation structure that produces maximum compliance. The ripple effects extend through the entire Springfield economy. The businesses that serve the plant workers, Moe's Tavern, the Quickie Mart, The various shops and restaurants all depend on the plant workers having income to spend, which means they depend on Burns, which means they have no interest in disrupting the relationship between Burns and his workforce, which means that every economic actor in Springfield has been quietly, structurally incorporated into a system where challenging Burns is economically self-destructive. This is how monopoly capitalism works in practice. You don't need to explicitly threaten everyone. You just need to ensure that everyone's livelihood is entangled with the continued operation of your enterprise. The community becomes a self-policing system. Individual actors enforce the status quo not because they've been instructed to, but because the alternative is economic catastrophe for themselves. Moe's Tavern needs Homer to have a job. Homer's job depends on the plant. The plant's continued operation in its current, violation-ridden, toxic form depends on Homer being incompetent enough to never trigger a shutdown. Therefore, Moe's Tavern is, structurally, invested in Homer's incompetence, not consciously, not deliberately, but materially, through the chains of economic dependency that Burns built. The quick E-Mart, the retirement home, the school, all of them receive funding or customers or students from the economic activity centered on the plant. All of them are, in some sense, downstream of Burns. All of them would be damaged by a regulatory shutdown of the facility that dominates Springfield's skyline and economy. All of them are, structurally, invested in the continuation of a status quo that is slowly poisoning the community they serve. And Burns sits at the center of this web, ancient and calculating, understanding exactly what he has built and exactly how durable it is. He's not just an employer. He's the reason Springfield's economy exists in its current form. He built the dependency, he maintains it, he exploits it. And if you ever want to understand why a town that knows its water is poisoned, and its fish have 3 eyes, and its billionaire glows in the dark after his medical treatments doesn't simply organize and demand change, this is your answer. You can't demand change from the person who signs your paycheck. Not when you have a mortgage and 3 kids and a dog and a wife, and the specific accumulated terror of a man who has been poor before and remembers exactly what it felt like. Homer can't fight Burns. Not because he's stupid, because he's afraid. And the thing he's afraid of is exactly the thing Burns has made him afraid of. Losing everything. The house, the family, the fragile, improbable security that the job at the plant, the job that is slowly killing him, provides. That's the trap. That's always been the trap. And Burns didn't build it recently. He's been refining it for over a century. Section 23. The Simpsons and Religion. What the show actually believes. The Simpsons has a complex, sustained, and surprisingly sincere relationship with religion. This isn't obvious from the surface. The surface treatment of religion in Springfield is largely comedic. Ned Flanders is the devout Christian, played for both sympathy and parody. Reverend Lovejoy is the burned-out pastor who has clearly lost his connection to the faith he nominally leads. The various religious institutions in Springfield are depicted with the same satirical affection and the same willingness to expose dysfunction as every other institution in the show. But underneath the comedy, the show has done something unusual. It has taken religion seriously as a subject. The clearest evidence is Homer's relationship with God. This is not a minor or occasional theme. It runs through the entire series as one of the show's most consistent and most under-examined threads. God speaks to Homer, multiple times, in direct, unambiguous, face-to-face conversations within the canonical logic of the show's universe. Homer the Heretic, the episode with the tornado, various other encounters across the decades. God appears. God talks to Homer. God gives Homer advice, theological perspective, and information about his own purpose and timing. Homer, the man with an IQ of 55, a crayon in his brain, a job he's been failing at for 3 decades, the safety inspector who caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor to see what would happen. This is the man God chooses to visit, regularly, conversationally, as if Homer is someone worth talking to. And Ned Flanders, the man who has dedicated his entire life to his faith, who reads scripture, who prays, who attends church every week without fail, who tries in every interaction he has to embody the values his faith asks of him. Ned has never had a direct conversation with God. Not once. This is not a trivial point. The show's universe contains a god who speaks to Homer but not to Ned, a god who acknowledges Homer's worthiness for divine conversation while ignoring the most devout man in Springfield. What does this mean? What is the show saying about the relationship between faith and divine favor? About the difference between institutional religion and genuine spiritual status? About who God actually finds interesting? One reading. The show is satirizing the absurdity of religious belief by depicting a God who plays favorites in ridiculous and arbitrary ways. God talks to Homer because it's funnier than God talking to Ned. The joke is that the religious guy doesn't get the revelation and the irreligious slob does. Another reading. The show is making a serious theological point about grace. Homer is exactly the kind of person that the Christian tradition, in its most genuine form, has always insisted is the subject of divine concern. Not the righteous, the broken, the failed, the lost, the man who can't do anything right and can't stop trying and keeps getting back up despite having no good reason to. Homer is not a good person, but he is a person in whom something keeps trying. And the show depicts God as responding to that, trying to that specific, battered, inarticulate, genuine effort in ways that don't respond to Ned's more polished faith. Ned believes correctly. Ned does everything correctly. And his correctness has become a kind of cage. His faith is performed faith, at this point not because he's insincere, but because the behavioral conditioning of his childhood has made it impossible to separate performance from experience. Ned cannot feel his faith anymore. He can only enact it. And the show's God, apparently, is more interested in Homer's messy, confused, intermittent, deeply impure spiritual life than in Ned's immaculate religious practice. This is a sophisticated theological position for a cartoon to be taking, and the show takes it consistently across decades without ever stating it directly. God keeps showing up for Homer. God keeps ignoring Ned. And the audience keeps laughing at Homer's encounters with the divine without fully registering what the show is doing with them. The show's treatment of the afterlife is equally interesting. The Treehouse of Horror episodes have depicted multiple versions of heaven and hell within the show's universe, most of them playing for comedy. But the canonical episodes have made it clear that the afterlife exists in some form within Springfield's reality. Characters have died and come back. Death has been depicted with enough consistency that it's clearly not purely metaphorical. And the divine, as we've established, intervenes in human affairs in this universe in ways that are observable and verifiable by multiple characters. What does it mean for Springfield? A town in which the divine is real, in which God talks to Homer Simpson, in which the afterlife is established as a genuine destination to simultaneously be a contamination zone where residents are being slowly poisoned by their employer? What does it mean for a God who visits Homer to allow Burns to continue operating a plant that is visibly, demonstrably destroying the community beneath it? The show doesn't answer this. It doesn't acknowledge the question. But the question is there, buried in the structure of the show's theology, just like everything else the show buries rather than addresses directly. Either God allows Burns's exploitation of Springfield because God's will operates on a scale that encompasses Springfield's suffering without being troubled by it, a genuinely dark theological position. Or God is operating within Springfield's system of collective denial too, looking the other way from the cracked cooling towers for the same reasons everyone else in Springfield looks the other way. Or the show's God is, like the show's everything else, subject to the selective memory and comfortable omissions that characterize every other institution in Springfield. In Springfield, even God forgets what he's supposed to be paying attention to. Section 24. The Simpsons in memory, how the show uses nostalgia as a weapon. There's something specific that happens to people when they talk about The Simpsons. They become protective. Intensely, almost irrationally protective. Not just of the show, though, they're protective of that too. Specifically the seasons they grew up with, the episodes they watched as children, the jokes that are burned into their memory in ways that other memories aren't. They become protective of the version of themselves that loved the show. The kid on the couch, the family watching together. The specific configuration of people in a specific room watching a specific episode and laughing together in a way that felt permanent even when it wasn't. The Simpsons is one of the most powerful nostalgia triggers in American cultural history. Not because it's the best show ever made, it's not. Even its most passionate defenders wouldn't claim that. But because it ran for so long, during such a formative period for so many viewers that it became structurally entangled with people's memories of their own childhoods in ways that other shows simply aren't. If you're in your 30s or 40s and you grew up in America, The Simpsons didn't just entertain you. It shaped how you understood entertainment. It shaped how you understood satire. It shaped how you understood family and work and class and authority and the relationship between what things appear to be and what they actually are. The show was doing cultural education the whole time it was making you laugh, and the education was so embedded in the entertainment that most viewers didn't notice it was happening. And now that education is inaccessible to critique, because criticizing The Simpsons, really criticizing it, saying something is wrong with it, or that it has failed, or that it is not what it was, feels like criticizing your own childhood. Like saying that the version of yourself that loved this show was wrong to love it. Like saying that the memory of watching it with your family is somehow less real or less valuable because the show itself has changed. This is why the "it got bad after season 8" argument is so emotionally charged. The argument isn't really about the show. It's about the person making the argument's relationship to their own past. The seasons people defend are always the seasons they watched when they were young. The seasons people criticize are always the ones they watched later, when they were older and more critical and the magic had partly worn off. Nobody who grew up watching season 22 talks about how everything before season 22 was the golden age. The show has been, in this sense, a machine for generating personalized nostalgia. It runs long enough that everyone finds their seasons, their episodes, their specific configuration of jokes and characters that feel like home. And then they defend those seasons the way people defend their hometowns, with a ferocity that isn't fully rational and doesn't need to be, because rationality isn't the point. Nostalgia isn't the point. The point is the specific, located, irreplaceable feeling of being the person who laughed at that joke, in that room, with those people. The show is a vehicle for that feeling. And when the show changes, when the later seasons feel different, when the magic isn't quite there, when the jokes land differently than they used to, it feels like a loss that goes beyond television. It feels like the childhood feeling is no longer accessible through this vehicle. Like something has been taken. This is by design. Not cynically, the show doesn't deliberately manipulate nostalgia in a calculated marketing sense. But the floating timeline, the persistent present, the characters who never age, all of it creates the conditions in which the show can function as a nostalgia machine indefinitely. The show never changes. The characters never age. The house always looks the same. Whatever you felt the first time you watched, the conditions for feeling it again are always theoretically present. The couch is always there. The couch gag always plays. The family always comes home. And in this way, The Simpsons has done something no other piece of American media has managed. It has become a persistent, inhabitable version of the past. Not a museum of a specific decade or era, the floating timeline prevents that, but a preserved emotional state, a condition of mind that was available to you at a certain point in your life, and that the show maintains the technical conditions for re-entering, indefinitely, forever. This is the deepest version of the loop, not the fictional loop in which Homer's coma dream sustains itself. The real loop in which the audience sustains itself through the show. We watch The Simpsons to feel like the people who used to watch The Simpsons. We go back because going back, at least partially, works. The joke lands, the character appears, the music plays, and for a moment, for less than a moment, for the duration of a reference or a gesture or a specific comedic beat, we are briefly the age we were the first time. That's the trick. That's what the show is selling. Underneath the satire and the mysteries and the theories. Not Bart, not Homer, not Burns, not Springfield. It's selling you yourself at a specific age, in a specific room, feeling a specific thing that you can't feel anymore except through this. And it works. It keeps working. 36 years in, with diminishing returns on every other level, the nostalgia mechanism still functions. The show is still running because people still need it to run. Not for the new episodes necessarily, but for the access they provide to the old ones. For the reminder that the old ones exist, for the continued existence of a cultural space in which the past is somehow still the present, and the children on the screen are still the same age they were when you were the age they appear to be. The floating timeline isn't just for the characters. It's for the audience. The Simpsons freezes us in time the way it freezes them. And every year we keep watching, we add another year to the freeze. Another year in which we agree, collectively, not to acknowledge how much time has passed. Springfield's collective denial isn't just a character in the show. We're all doing it. Every time we hit play. Section 25. The Mystery of Moe's Tavern. Springfield's Beating Dark Heart. Moe Szyslak is one of the most underexamined characters in The Simpsons. On the surface, he's a simple archetype. The gruff, misanthropic bartender, the service industry figure who would rather not be serving anyone, the man whose exterior hostility masks a loneliness so deep and so long-standing that it has become indistinguishable from his personality. But Moe is more than that, and the show has been showing you how much more for 36 years without ever quite making the case explicitly. Moe's Tavern is the third location in the Simpsons universe, after 742 Evergreen Terrace and the nuclear plant. It's the space where Homer's adult life, the life outside work, outside family, is lived. The tavern is where Homer goes to be Homer, without the complications of being a husband and father. It's where the men of Springfield go to be the versions of themselves they can't be at home. This is a very specific cultural institution. The bar as refuge. The bar as community. The bar as the one place where a working-class man's presence is unconditionally accepted regardless of his failures elsewhere. Moe's Tavern is the functional center of Homer's social world, and Moe is its presiding spirit. And Moe is, by any objective measure, miserable. The show has given Moe a history in fragments. He was an aspiring boxer in his youth, a promising career that ended in ways the show has never fully explained, leaving him with the broken nose and the bitter edge of someone who was once close to something better and lost it. He was at some point part of a relationship or relationships that went badly. He has people in his past family, friends, connections that the show references without developing. He is deeply, comprehensively alone. Moe's loneliness is not comedic loneliness. It's not the quirky bachelor who can't get a date joke that the early seasons occasionally played it as. It's something more substantial and more disturbing. Moe is a man who has been so thoroughly shaped by disappointment that hope, when it occasionally surfaces, is almost immediately extinguished either by circumstances or by his own self-sabotage. The specific kind of self-destruction that affects people who have learned to expect failure and cannot function in the presence of its alternative. The show has given Moe periodic love interests, periodic moments of genuine happiness or success, and it has taken all of them away, usually in ways that imply Moe's own psychology was as responsible as external circumstances. He is not just unlucky. He is constructed, at this point, to fail. His expectation of failure has become a self-fulfilling prophecy, sophisticated enough to feel like fate. Under the radiation theory, Moe takes on an interesting dimension. He is one of Springfield's longest-tenured residents. He has been behind that bar for decades. He has been breathing the same contaminated air and drinking the same poisoned water as everyone else. And the effect on Moe appears to be different from the effect on Homer, not a reduction in intelligence, but a reduction in something else. In hope. In the capacity for forward-looking thought. In the ability to imagine a version of his life that isn't exactly what it currently is, Moe is cognitively functional. He runs a bar. He manages money. He has shown, in various episodes, that he is capable of complex thinking when motivated, but he cannot seem to think forward. He lives entirely in the present, and the present is always a version of the same grimy bar, the same regulars, the same phone calls from Bart with the same insulting fake names, the same sequence of small humiliations and small consolations that have constituted his entire adult life. If the radiation damages different people in different ways, if Homer's damage is to intelligence, and Moe's damage is to hope, and Ned's damage is to authenticity, then Moe represents the specific, terrible mutation of a man who has lost access to his own future. He can experience the present. He can remember the past. But the future, the imagined better life, the improved circumstances, the next good thing that seems to be closed to him, the tavern itself is worth examining more closely. It is a genuinely strange place. The patrons Homer, Lenny, Carl, Barney, in his earlier incarnations, represent a cross-section of Springfield's working-class male population. And the show has depicted, across hundreds of bar scenes over 36 years, something quite specific about what these men are and are not able to say to each other. They can complain, they can joke, they can commiserate about work and family and money and the general difficulty of their lives, but they cannot, with any consistency, be vulnerable in ways that go beyond the surface. The bar is a social space with specific and rigid rules about what kinds of expression are permitted. And the kinds that are permitted are, broadly, the kinds that don't require genuine self-disclosure. This is Mo's space. He built it, or inherited it, or stumbled into it and stayed. And the rules of the space are the rules of Mo's emotional life writ large. You can be here, you can drink, you can talk about the things you're allowed to talk about, but you cannot ask for more than this, and this is all there is. And this is all there will ever be. In this light, the recurring bit where Bart calls the bar asking for fake names, I'm looking for Amanda Hugginkiss, Mike Roch, Seymour Butts takes on a different texture. Bart is disrupting the bar's emotional stasis. He's introducing absurdity into a space that depends on its own specific, numbing routines to function. And Mo's response, the erupting anger, the threats, the disproportionate fury, isn't really about the prank. It's about the disruption, about being reminded, through the medium of an insulting fake name announced to the bar's patrons, that his life is being pranked by something he can't find or confront. Mo doesn't know Bart is calling. He thinks the calls are random, or he suspects Homer. And the real caller, the 10-year-old kid down the street, is never held accountable in any meaningful way, because the show's structure protects Bart from consequences, just as surely as Springfield's social structure protects Burns from consequences. Everything in Springfield protects the wrong people from accountability. The billionaire, the prankster, the imposter principle, and everything exposes the right people to consequences without protection. Mo, Ned, Mona, Homer, the people in Springfield who are most damaged by the system, are also the people the system most consistently fails to protect. This is not an accident. It's the show's most consistent structural argument, running beneath every episode for 36 years. The systems that are supposed to protect people consistently protect the people who need protection least and fail the people who need it most. Springfield's institutions, its government, its police, its regulatory bodies, its economic structures, all of them, consistently serve Burns and fail everyone else. And Mo's Tavern, sitting at the bottom of this hierarchy, is where the failing is most visible, where the men who have been most thoroughly failed come to drink and be together and not talk about any of it. The Tavern is Springfield's most honest institution, not because it pretends to do something good it doesn't, it's a bar, it just serves beer, but because it has no illusions about what it is. The school pretends it's educating children while running on whatever budget Burns didn't steal. The police department pretends it's enforcing the law while being comprehensively unable to investigate anything that threatens Burns's interests. The power plant pretends it's providing clean energy while poisoning the water table. Mo's Tavern doesn't pretend anything. It's a bar where unhappy people come to be unhappy together. And in Springfield, that kind of honest unhappiness is almost refreshing. Section 26. The Simpsons and Time. A final reckoning. Everything comes back to time. Every mystery we've examined in this video, every theory, every buried storyline, every impossible contradiction, they all trace back to time. The show's relationship with time. Springfield's relationship with time. Our relationship with the show's relationship with time. Time is the subject the show has been circling for 36 years without ever landing on it directly. The coma theory is about time, specifically about time stopping for a man who went under in 1993 and is still dreaming. The radiation theory is about time, about the accumulation of contamination over decades, the slow warping of biology that manifests not as sudden catastrophe but as gradual, imperceptible change that none of the changed people can see because the change happened too slowly for them to notice. The Burns immortality theory is about time, specifically about one man's determination to buy himself free of it, to opt out of mortality through sufficient wealth and sufficient medical innovation. The floating timeline is the most explicit time theory of all. It's the show's decision to stop time for its characters while allowing time to pass for its audience. But there's a deeper relationship with time running through all of these, and it's this. The Simpsons has always understood that time is the thing we're most afraid of losing our grip on. Not death exactly, not change exactly. Time. The passage of it. The way it turns things that felt permanent into things that feel impossibly remote. The way it makes the couch you sat on as a child, the specific couch, in the specific house, at the specific age, something that you cannot get back to even if the physical objects still exist. The show has been offering its audience a refuge from this particular fear for 3.5 decades. Not by pretending time doesn't pass, it acknowledges, constantly, that time passes in the world outside Springfield. But by maintaining a space, the space inside the television screen, inside the Springfield city limits, inside the fictional universe where Bart is still 10 and Lisa is still 8, and Marge's hair is still impossibly vertical, where time is suspended, where the thing that has been taken from us is still, technically, available, where we can go back. This is why the show's quality declining matters so much to people. It's not that they can't enjoy less good television. They enjoy less good television all the time. It's that the show's quality declining means that the refuge is no longer fully functional. The mechanism that was supposed to maintain the suspension of time is showing wear. The dream is less vivid than it used to be. The comfort is less complete. And if the refuge fails, if the suspension breaks, if the dream becomes obviously a dream rather than a viable alternate present, then time starts moving again inside Springfield too, and the loss that the show was protecting us from becomes impossible to avoid. Every argument about when The Simpsons got bad is an argument about when someone's personal time suspension mechanism started to fail. When the show stopped being able to fully maintain the fiction of the permanent present, when the magic became visible as magic rather than invisible as reality. And that moment is different for everyone, because it corresponds to the moment when each individual viewer became old enough, or critical enough, or tired enough, or differently nostalgic to perceive the mechanism rather than simply inhabiting it. The show's writers understand this. Al Jean understands this. Matt Groening understood it when he designed the floating timeline. The show was never going to be about growing up. It was always going to be about the refusal to grow up. About the human need to have a place where growth is optional, where the children stay children and the parents stay middle-aged and the town stays exactly the same as it was the first time you saw it. Homer and Marge are still together. Bart and Lisa and Maggie are still there. The house still has the same wallpaper and the same kitchen and the same couch and the same television. And somewhere in a hospital in Springfield, if the coma theory is right, a man is still dreaming about all of this, still holding on to the family he loves by the only means available to him, still refusing to let the story end. The loop is both our gift and our prison. We gave it to ourselves. We accepted it willingly. We press play every week and enter the suspension, and let the time in Springfield protect us for 22 minutes from the time outside Springfield that keeps moving without our permission. And when the episode ends, when the credits roll, when the couch gag has played and the family has run through the door in sequence, and the specific melody of the main theme has finished, we come back. We return to the time that doesn't suspend, the time that passed while we were in Springfield. The time that took us further from the couch we watched on as kids, further from the people we watched with, further from the age we were when we first learned that Homer Simpson worked in a nuclear plant, and his daughter played the saxophone, and his son was 10 years old, and somehow that was funny and warm and true and like home. We come back. We always come back. The loop closes around us every time. And Springfield, ageless, impossible, poisoned, dreaming, somewhere in the American heartland and also everywhere at once, waits for us to press play again. It always will. That's the whole point. That's the whole beautiful, complicated, radiation-soaked, comatose, cover-up-riddled, floating timeline. Hans Moleman dying in the background. God talking to Homer and ignoring Ned. Burns glowing in the dark after his treatments. Maggie waiting behind her pacifier. Lisa playing saxophone alone in her room. Bart making the only rational response to an irrational world. Marge holding it all together by sheer will. Homer dreaming and dreaming and dreaming point. And we wouldn't have it any other way. Thank you for making it to the end. Drop your location and the time in the comments. I want to know where in the world people are still watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. And the next time you sit down to watch The Simpsons, remember, you're not just watching a cartoon. You're visiting a contamination zone, entering a coma dream, reopening an unsolved shooting, watching a man who has been alive for 140 years manage his weekly radiation treatment, staring at the infrastructure of Springfield's collective denial, listening to a genius baby who hasn't decided yet what to do about any of it, and pressing pause on the clock that never stops. See you in Springfield. End of script, approximately 40,000 words. Section 27. The secondary villains? Who else is keeping Springfield down? Burns gets all the attention. And he deserves it. He's the show's central antagonist, the engine of its darkest themes, the man whose decisions ripple through every other character's life in ways most of them never trace back to him. But Burns isn't the only force in Springfield working against the Simpson family and against the town more broadly. The show has populated its universe with a secondary layer of dysfunction that is less dramatically obvious, but no less consequential. Superintendent Chalmers, for instance. Chalmers appears in Springfield periodically as the immediate superior of Principal Skinner, or rather of Armin Tamzarian, who is pretending to be Skinner, and his relationship with Springfield Elementary is one of the most consistently depicted educational failures in the show's history. Chalmers knows the school is poorly run. He sees evidence of it every time he appears, and his response, episode after episode, is to express frustration, threaten consequences, and then ultimately accept the situation without meaningfully improving it. This is not incompetence exactly. This is something more specific and more familiar. The bureaucratic actor who operates within a system he knows is broken, makes the motions of accountability, and then retreats to the position that the system requires of him. Chalmers cannot fix Springfield Elementary because fixing it would require resources and political will that the system doesn't provide and that his position doesn't generate. He can yell at Skinner, he can threaten, he can inspect, but he cannot fundamentally change the conditions that produce the failure he's observing. So he performs accountability without achieving it. He goes through the motions of the system working while the system fails the children inside it. This is the second layer of institutional failure in Springfield, the layer that exists not because of Burns's specific malice, but because of the general entropy of institutions that have been allowed to decay. Springfield's school system is underfunded, chaotically administered, and educationally compromised at every level. And the people theoretically responsible for fixing it perform the rituals of oversight without the substance of correction. The children who pass through Springfield Elementary, Bart and Lisa, and all the others are being educated in an institution that the show consistently depicts as fundamentally unable to educate them. This has consequences that extend well beyond the comedy of Bart failing his classes. If Springfield's children are being educated by a system that isn't actually educating them, then the next generation of Springfield adults will be no better equipped than the current one to understand what's being done to their community. The cognitive damage doesn't just come from the radiation. It comes from the education, or the lack of it, or the specific shape of an education that teaches you how to behave without teaching you how to think. And this is why Lisa's intelligence is so remarkable and so threatening to Springfield's status quo. She learned to think despite the school rather than because of it. She arrived at intellectual sophistication through some combination of innate ability, her own self-education, and whatever remains of her family's uncontaminated genetic potential. She is the exception that proves the rule of what Springfield Elementary produces: people who know enough to function, but not enough to question. The media in Springfield is another layer of this. Kent Brockman, Springfield's primary television news personality, is one of the show's most biting satirical creations. He is not incompetent exactly. He is pliable. He covers stories with apparent sincerity until the moment his personal comfort or safety is threatened, at which point he pivots instantly and without apparent ethical conflict. He declared his allegiance to the invading ants in one Treehouse of Horror segment, in a move that was meant as comedy but reads as a precise description of how media personalities behave when faced with actual threatening power. He covers Burns's activities with the specificity and the critical distance of a man who understands exactly where his funding comes from. Springfield's media apparatus is not a check on Burns's power. It is, like everything else in the town, an institution that has been configured to sustain the status quo rather than challenge it. Not through direct censorship, the show doesn't depict Burns explicitly controlling the news, though the implication is there. Through the subtler mechanism of a media environment in which the stories that would challenge power are the stories that are too complicated, too expensive, too risky to tell. The Three-Eyed Fish got coverage, but the follow-up study of the water quality never aired. The skeletons in the nuclear plant's basement never became a news story. The billionaire who glows in the dark after his weekly medical treatments has never been investigated by Kent Brockman's news team, because there are stories you can cover and stories you can't. And a local news personality in a company town knows the difference intuitively, even if he's never been explicitly told. Dr. Hibbert, Springfield's most prominent physician, a man who has treated the Simpson family for 3 decades and who operates within a medical culture that the show has consistently depicted as compromised by conflicts of interest, financial pressures, and a casual indifference to the specific environmental factors that might explain the specific health outcomes he keeps seeing in his patients. Dr. Hibbert is not a bad doctor in the personal malpractice sense, but he practices medicine in a community that is being systematically poisoned, and he has never, in 36 years of canonical episodes, made that connection or pursued it. This might be because he doesn't know. But that seems implausible. A physician practicing in the shadow of a nuclear plant with 342 violations? Treating patients who display the kind of physical anomalies that Homer and Marge and their children display should probably have some questions about the relationship between the local environment and the health outcomes he's observing. The fact that he doesn't ask those questions is either gross professional negligence, which the show occasionally implies, or evidence that the medical establishment in Springfield has been incorporated into the same system of enforced ignorance that governs every other institution in town. Or perhaps Dr. Hibbert is simply practicing within the limits of what Springfield's healthcare infrastructure can support. He can treat symptoms, he cannot address causes. And the cause, the power plant, the radiation, the environmental contamination that is the root of most of what he sees in his practice, is not treatable by a doctor. It would require regulatory action, legal action, political will, things that Dr. Hibbert's stethoscope cannot provide, and that Springfield's institutions are specifically configured never to produce. The show's secondary cast of institutional actors Chalmers, Brockman, Hibbert, Wiggum, Lovejoy, all of them are not villains in the way Burns is a villain. They're participants. They're the functionaries whose continued function within the system is what makes the system functional. Every institution that should check Burns's power instead sustains it not through active conspiracy, but through the accumulated choices of individuals who have determined that complicity is the more comfortable option. And complicity, practiced at scale, by enough people for long enough, becomes indistinguishable from the natural order of things. It becomes the way things are. It becomes Springfield. Section 28. The show within the show. What Krusty tells us about The Simpsons itself. Krusty the Clown is the oldest show on Springfield's television airwaves. He has been performing for the children of Springfield for as long as the show has existed. And his relationship with his audience, the children who adore him, the adults who remember adoring him, the persistent cultural presence that extends far beyond any reasonable assessment of his artistic merit mirrors, in a compressed and satirical form, the relationship between The Simpsons and its own audience. Think about it. Krusty's show is not particularly good. It never was. Its comedy is broad and cheap. Its production values are low. Its host is visibly going through the motions of performance without genuine engagement with the material. And the children who watch it love it anyway. Because Krusty's show isn't really about quality. It's about the emotional function it serves. It's about having something that's yours, that was there when you were young, that occupies a specific place in your memory as a symbol of a specific kind of innocence. Bart's devotion to Krusty is one of the show's most emotionally complex running jokes. Bart knows, on some level, that Krusty is not what he appears to be. He has encountered Krusty's reality multiple times. The gambling, the drinking, the bankruptcy, the various shady activities, and each time, his fundamental devotion survives the revelation. Bart keeps believing in Krusty not because he's naive, but because belief in Krusty is something he needs to sustain. Krusty is the version of the world that Bart wants to exist. Irreverent, funny, unbound by responsibility, free to be ridiculous in ways that Bart himself aspires to. The fact that the real Krusty is miserable doesn't change what the ideal of Krusty represents. The fact that the real Krusty drinks himself into blackouts before his shows doesn't change what Krusty's shows meant to Bart when he was young enough to believe in them completely. The ideal and the reality have separated. The ideal persists, because the ideal was always more about Bart than it was about Krusty. This is The Simpsons in miniature. The show is Krusty, the audience is Bart. We know, at this point, that the show is not what it was. We know that the people making it are, to varying degrees, going through the motions of producing The Simpsons, rather than experiencing whatever it was that made the early seasons feel alive. We know that the magic has worn off and the production has continued, and the quality has declined in ways we're all very capable of articulating, but we keep watching. Or we keep referencing. Or we keep caring in the specific way that people care about things they know have passed their peak, because the thing that has passed its peak was once so central to who they were that abandoning it feels like abandoning a part of themselves. The show is Krusty, and like Krusty, the show continues because the continuance is its own justification, because the institution has outlasted the enthusiasm that created it, because the audience's need for it has outlasted the creator's capacity to fully meet that need. Because stopping would require admitting that it's over, and it's very hard to admit that something is over when so many people need it not to be. Krusty never stops his show. He is too deeply identified with it to have an identity without it. Krusty is the clown. The Simpsons is the show, and neither of them knows how to be anything else. So they both continue. In diminished form but genuine form. With less of what made them great, but still with enough of it to justify the claim of continuity. And the children who grew up watching Bart's generation, and the real-world equivalent of Bart's generation, keep showing up. Not every week, necessarily, but for the anniversaries and the special episodes and the moments when the show does something that briefly recaptures what it used to be regularly, they keep showing up because Krusty is still there. The show is still running. The institution is still standing. And as long as that's true, the ideal is still technically available. The dream of what it was is maintained by the reality of what it is. This is not a cynical reading. This is a loving one, because loving something that has changed while the memory of what it was stays perfect is one of the most human experiences there is. And The Simpsons, whatever else it is and whatever it has become in 36 seasons and over 780 episodes, has earned that love many times over. It earned it in the years when it was excellent. It maintained it in the years when it wasn't. And it continues to earn it in the specific, particular, irreplaceable way that only things we have been with for a very long time can earn our continued presence. We don't watch Krusty's show because it's good. We watch it because we are the generation of children who grew up watching it. And Krusty, for all his failures, for all his reality, for all the gap between the clown and the man, is still, somehow, ours. The Simpsons is Krusty, and we are Bart. And Springfield will be there next week, and the week after, and every week for as long as we need it to be, which is going to be a very, very long time. That's everything. 36 seasons, over 780 episodes. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the unsolved shooting, the immortal billionaire, the episode that revealed how Springfield really works, the most dangerous baby in television history, the predictions, Mona Simpson, the floating timeline, Hans Moleman dying and coming back, Ned Flanders' broken heart, the economics of exploitation, the mystery of Springfield's location, the nostalgia machine, Moe's eternal bar, and the specific, persistent human need to have a place where time doesn't pass. If you made it this far, you're one of the people this video was made for. Leave a comment with your location and the time. I genuinely want to know where in the world people are sitting with this. Subscribe. Because there's more Springfield to get through. And in Springfield, there always is. See you next time. Final end of script. Section 29. The thing Springfield gets exactly right. Why the satire still lands. We've spent this entire video treating Springfield as a diagnostic subject. A patient on the table. A contaminated zone whose pathologies we're here to catalog. And that's warranted. The show is a diagnostic text. And its mysteries and contradictions and buried dark themes are the real substance of what it's been doing for 36 years. But there's something that gets lost in pure analysis. Something that the theory building and the mystery solving doesn't quite capture. And that's this. The Simpsons, at its best, gets things exactly right. Not satirically right, not metaphorically right. Right in the specific, precise, observed way that only comes from writers who have been paying very close attention to the actual texture of working-class American life. The show has always known things about its characters' world that the characters themselves can't articulate. It knows what it's like to work a job you don't like for a boss who doesn't value you. It knows what it's like to need that job anyway. It knows the specific exhaustion of being a parent, the love and the resentment and the guilt about the resentment, and the way those things exist simultaneously without contradiction. It knows the specific quality of a marriage that has survived long enough to be something completely different from what it started as, and somehow more valuable for having survived. Homer and Marge are, among many other things, one of the most accurately observed long-term relationships in the history of American television. Not because their relationship is realistic in any documentary sense, Marge's hair alone disqualifies the show from realism, but because the emotional dynamics between them are observed with unusual precision, the way two people who have been together for a very long time stop fully communicating and then have to learn to communicate again. The way love becomes something you sustain rather than something you feel, and the way sustaining it turns back into feeling it, and the way that cycle repeats in different forms for as long as the relationship lasts. The show knows that Marge holds the family together. It has always known this. And it knows that Homer knows it too, in the specific, inarticulate way that Homer knows things through instinct rather than analysis, through the feeling of wrongness when Marge is upset rather than through any rational understanding of cause and effect. Homer doesn't understand his marriage in any sophisticated sense, but he feels it. And his feeling of it, the terror when Marge seems distant, the specific quality of his relief when she forgives him, the genuine bewilderment at why she puts up with him, is one of the most honest emotional portraits in the show. The show also knows something about class that most American television has been too polite or too aspirational to say directly. The working class doesn't just face material deprivation. It faces a specific kind of cultural invisibility. A condition in which the people who make the decisions that shape your life don't know your name, in which the institution you give your labor to treats you as interchangeable, in which your expertise Homer actually does know things about how to prevent nuclear meltdowns, despite his comedy stupidity, because he's been doing the job for 3 decades, is never recognized, because the institution has decided in advance that you are not the kind of person whose expertise is worth recognizing. Burns can't remember Homer's name. This is the show's most consistent joke about class, and it's devastating, not as a critique of Burns's memory, though that's part of it. As a critique of the specific way power relates to the people it employs. Homer has worked for Burns for 36 years. Homer has, by the show's own account, prevented dozens of nuclear incidents through a combination of luck and the specific kind of practical intelligence that develops in people who do the same job long enough to develop instincts for it. And Burns cannot remember his name, not as a deliberate insult, simply because Homer is not the kind of person Burns notices. This is the truth about power that The Simpsons has been telling for 36 years. Power doesn't hate the people below it. Power doesn't notice them. And being unnoticed by the institution that controls your life, that writes your check, that owns the building where you spend your days, that could end your livelihood with a memo, is a particular kind of invisibility that is harder to articulate than hatred and harder to fight. Homer can't fight Burns because Homer doesn't exist to Burns. You cannot challenge someone who doesn't see you. You cannot demand recognition from someone for whom your recognition is genuinely irrelevant. Burns doesn't need Homer to exist as a full person. He needs Homer to exist as a unit of labor reliable enough to show up, incompetent enough not to file the regulatory reports that would shut the plant down, permanent enough not to require the inconvenience of being replaced. This is the economic relationship the show has been depicting from its first season, through all 36 of them, in every episode where Homer goes to work and Burns fails to acknowledge him. It is one of the most accurate depictions of the experience of being a working-class person in a capitalist economy that American popular culture has ever produced. And it's embedded in a comedy about a yellow family and their talking dog, and their next-door neighbor who might or might not be a saint or a psychological time bomb. The genius of The Simpsons, the specific, irreducible genius. That explains why it became the cultural monument it is, and why it will continue to occupy that position for as long as any of the people who grew up with it are alive, is that it puts the truest things inside the funniest jokes. The critique is embedded in the comedy the way the radiation is embedded in the water. You absorb it without knowing you're absorbing it, and it changes you anyway. Homer gets hit by a car and walks away. And while you're laughing at that, you're absorbing the show's darkest observation. that people like Homer have to walk away, that they don't have the option of staying, that the specific resilience of the working class is inseparable from the specific brutality of the conditions that produce it. Homer isn't indestructible because he's special. He's indestructible because he has no choice. The car hits him. He gets up. Because if he didn't get up, there would be no paycheck, no mortgage, no dinner on the table. The comedy and the tragedy are the same thing in The Simpsons. That's always been the case. That's why the best episodes hit hardest when they're also funniest. Because the laugh and the gut punch arrive at the same moment. And for a second, you don't know which feeling is which. And then you know they're both real at the same time. That's what 36 years of The Simpsons has given us. The ability to laugh and ache simultaneously, to sit with a cartoon about a yellow family in an impossible town and feel underneath the comedy and the satire and the theory and the mystery, something that is true. Springfield is wrong, and Springfield is home. Both things at once. Always both things at once. And we keep going back. Section 30. What happens if Homer wakes up? Let's end with the question nobody wants to ask. The question that the coma theory leads to but never quite arrives at. The question that is, maybe, the most important one in 36 years of Springfield. What happens if Homer wakes up? Not in the dream. Not in the fake deleted scene version that the show produced and then disavowed. Actually wakes up in the hospital. In Springfield General. In the real world, the show has been keeping him from since April 1993. The dream ends. The simulation crashes. The permanent present stops and real-time resumes. And Homer Simpson, who went under as a man in his mid-30s with 3 young children and a wife who loved him and a house on Evergreen Terrace, opens his eyes into a world that has moved on without him for 3 decades. What does he find? If he wakes up now in 2025, 32 years after the coma began, Bart would be in his 40s. Not the rebellious 10-year-old of the dream. A middle-aged man who has spent his entire adult life with a father in a coma. Whatever Bart became, he became it without Homer. Whatever wounds came from growing up without a father who was present in any meaningful sense, those are 3 decades old and fully formed. Lisa would be in her late 30s. The brilliant 8-year-old would be a woman who has been brilliant for 38 years without her father to see it, who learned the saxophone and kept playing without Homer to hear it, who grew into the person the flash-forward episodes imagined intelligent, principled, lonely, searching without the dream version of Homer to love her the way Dream Homer does. Maggie. Maggie would be 33 years old. The baby with the pacifier would be an adult. Whatever extraordinary intelligence the dream depicted, whatever potential the radiation theory imagined, whatever plan was developing behind those enormous eyes it would have developed in the real world, without the protection of Homer's dream. And Marge. Marge, who has been patient and loving and held everything together in the dream, what has Marge been doing for 32 years in the real world? Has she waited? Has she built something else? Has she made her peace with the loss and found a way to continue, the way Marge always finds a way to continue? Or has the weight of a husband in a coma present and absent simultaneously, too real to mourn and too far to reach broken something in her that the dream Marge never shows? Homer would wake up and the family would be there physically, probably, because families don't generally abandon comatose fathers, but not the family of the dream. Not Bart at 10, not Lisa at 8, not Maggie with her pacifier. The real family. The family that grew up in real time while Homer was dreaming about them staying small. And Homer would have to learn his family all over again, would have to meet the people his children became, would have to find out whether the love that sustained the dream, the love that kept the simulation running for 32 years, that refused to let the story end, that kept Homer finding his way home at the end of every episode, whether that love is sufficient for the reality. For the 40-year-old Bart, he doesn't know. For the 38-year-old Lisa, he last knew as a child. For the 33-year-old Maggie, who never needed him to protect her because she was protecting herself in the way extraordinary people do without anyone noticing. Homer would have to find out if love that was built in a dream is portable into the waking world. And we would have to find out if we believe it is. This is the question the coma theory leaves you with. Not whether the theory is true, whether the thing the theory implies about the nature of love is true. Whether the 32 years of dreaming about his family, the thousands of hours of Homer's comatose mind insisting, over and over, that the family is still there, still young, still reachable, Still worth dreaming about whether that constitutes something real. Something that would survive the collision with the reality of who those people actually became. The show says yes. Every episode says yes. The dream insists that what Homer feels for his family is real, regardless of whether the family exists in the form he's experiencing them. The love is real. The dream is the love's expression. And love, that strong love that sustains a coma dream for 3 decades, rather than let the story end, is probably portable. Probably enough. Probably the thing that makes the waking up survivable. If the waking up ever comes. Probably. But we'll never know. Because in Springfield, Homer never wakes up. The dream never ends. The story never concludes. The loop keeps going. Because we need it to. Because the question of whether Homer's love is enough, whether the dream family is real enough, whether 32 years of refusing to let go actually constitutes a form of holding on that question, is too important to answer. Answering it would end the show. And the show cannot end. Not because it's contractually obligated to continue, because it means too much to too many people to be allowed to arrive at a conclusion. The Simpsons will run until the audience stops needing it. And if 36 years are any guide, the audience is not going to stop needing it anytime soon. Homer keeps dreaming. We keep watching. Springfield keeps existing in its impossible, contaminated, comatose, beautifully maintained permanent present. And nobody ages, and nobody wakes up, and the couch gag plays, and Bart is 10, and Lisa is 8, and Maggie waits, behind her pacifier, for the moment she decides to speak. And somewhere in a hospital room in a town that doesn't appear on any map, a man who has been dreaming for 32 years is still, miraculously still dreaming, holding on, not letting go, refusing, with everything his deteriorating brain has left, to let the story end. Because in the dream, it's still Sunday night, and the family is still home, and the beer is still cold, and nobody has to say goodbye. And for Homer Simpson, lying in that hospital bed with the television playing somewhere above him, and the sounds of Springfield filtering through the fog, that is enough. That has always been enough. That will always be enough. This has been every theory, every mystery, every buried secret, and every impossible question in 36 years of The Simpsons. If you made it here, you deserve a medal, or at least a Duff beer. Drop your time and location in the comments. I want to see who watched this all the way through and from where. Subscribe if you haven't, because there's more of this coming. And I'll see you in the next one. Same time, same channel. In Springfield, there's always a next time.